The photo that Kakashi gave them in the days following Team 7's official genin status was something Sasuke didn't know why he kept at that point. He genuinely didn't like the picture or his teammates, and he reenacted all the instances in which he could have simply thrown it out. Regretfully, Sasuke had recalled every detail of that day's events. He recalled the weather, the training schedule Kakashi had set up for them, the numerous pointless battles Naruto had initiated, and the numerous pointless battles that Naruto had lost. He also recalled how many times that photo had to be taken again. To be precise, 8. It would have been taken repeatedly until it was completely perfect if the cameraman had been any other cameraman, but this one was not like the others. It turned out to be a cameraman. Additionally, cameramen are more patient than cameranin. Sasuke recalled the cameranin's patient and kind words, "Just stay fucking still," and his cooperation, "If I have to take one more picture, I'm shoving a kunai up your rectum." And, of course, the final result. A girl with a large forehead grinning broadly in the center, 2 scowling boys with ruffled hair, and an unusually enthusiastic sensei. Sasuke was unable to smile at that precise moment. He had already packed everything he would need, tidied his room appropriately, and mentally readied himself for the new course he had made, mostly with force. However, after making this important decision, which he almost immediately accepted, he was unable to make a single, minor decision. Whether or not to accompany him in the Team 7 photo. Because, in contrast to earlier, that picture was comforting to him. In lieu of the family he so unjustly lost, he so richly earned a new one. His family would weaken him. He would be burdened by his family. Not the kind of family he required. Not the kind of family he required. He didn't require anything, no, he required strength. Sasuke put the picture frame face down, unable to identify any emotion. The person he would miss the most, though, was the one who had taught him, encouraged him to grow stronger, and was there whether he wanted him to be or not. That individual was Kakashi. The aforementioned Junin turned a page of Ichi Paradise and said, "Sasuke, I didn't expect you to sense me. I'm impressed, but I'm even more impressed about you packing up before I even told you we have an urgent mission." "Well, you know how I am. But, it was the mission you were packing for, nay, Sasuke." "Yeah, then let's go." "Yeah. Well, Naruto, I suppose I don't have to leave you after all." "Naruto, Naruto, get your ass out of bed." That was the moment when Sakura's lovely voice woke Naruto up. "Oi, aren't Sakuras supposed to be delicate?" "What? Nothing. Wah, stop hitting me, Sakura-chan." "Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi-sensei. Oi, Kakashi-sensei." "Yes, Naruto? Where are we going?" "To see the Go Dame." "Why?" "For a mission." "What mission?" "An important mission." "What kind of important missio?" "Shut up, Usuratonkachi." "1. Oi. Don't tell me what to do, Sasuke Teme." Sasuke appeared to be about to respond, but instead he let out a weary, irate sigh. Strange. "Oi, Sasuke, you okay?" "Whatever. We're here, everyone." When the 3 of them looked up, they saw the entrance to the enormous work office of the Godem. Naruto led the way as they started to file up the stairs. He had visited this place more than a few times, either to discuss important matters, get advice from Tsunade no Bakken, or simply to spend time with his Hokage. He was here unless he was training, on a mission, or at home. Naruto shouted, "Tsunade no Bakken," and threw open the doors. "Kakashi-sensei says you have an important mission for us." The loud genin was essentially told that he was not the only one who had been abruptly and violently roused by the Hokage's bored, e-hosted gaze as she looked up from her papers. Naruto shut up. "Everyone else, please have a seat." Sasuke nodded appropriately, and Sakura bowed courteously. The 4 of them took a seat. "I just received a message from a good friend of the late Sandaime and Albus Dumbledore." "What the hell is a Dumbledore?" "You all know about magic, right?" "Duh. Then I don't have to explain that part of the mission, if you're so knowledgeable." "Sasuke, this Albus Dumbledore has asked that I send a couple of our best shinobi to his school for magic lizards or something. You know what, it's late, and I didn't really read it." The Hokage then glared at him, saying, "Tsunade no Bakken not doing her homework, Now, where did I put that paper?" "Ah, here it is. He is the master of a school for wizards and witches. It's a magic school, sort of like the academy, but much, much longer, at least 7 years. 7 years? Of learning basic and advanced magic? Excuse me, Tsunade-sama, but what kind of magic?" "Magic from a stick." "Oh, and this," the Hokage said abruptly, removing a sake cup from the inside of her jacket before sloppily setting it on the table. "What? We're gonna ride the cup?" This Naruto, you idiot, is a port key. It's a special transportation device that allows you to magically appear to its corresponding object at a given place. So, we're taking the cup. Naruto, Dobi, if we weren't taking the cup, then why would she explain what it was? Well, actually, Sasuke, you're taking a transportation circle. What? Why? Because I can't exactly figure out how the damn thing works. I'm guessing that the transportation circle isn't as reliable as the port key, but it's the best we can do at such short notice. Why are we going now, at 3 in the morning, anyway? Because Dumbledore was also good friends with the late Cage, and also offered the Sand Nin a job. Do you know how much that guy is offering? A lot more than a usual year-long mission. So I am sending you off now, before the Sand Nin even get an owl. Owl? Just go. And with complaints, the 3 genin were sent to the roof, where the circle transportation would take place. The size of the transportation circle was enormous, comparable to the one that the Sound Nin had previously used to call forth the enormous, 3-headed snake that wreaked havoc on Konohagore on the day the Sandaime was killed. Sacred ink was used to draw the outer circle, and blood was used to draw the inner circle and its intersecting lines, too. When Naruto saw the medic Nin and 3 other familiar shinobi sitting where the lines of the transportation circle met, he exclaimed, "Ah, Shizune Nichan, are you coming with us?" "No, we're just helping you get there, Naruto. If you all could please stand in the inner circle, we can begin." Team 7 agreed. "Bite your thumbs, and write your names in blood anywhere inside it, please." Shizune started the ritual as soon as the final task was finished. In accordance with this, she and her colleagues shaped their chakra and swiftly and synchronously started to create a lengthy list of hand seals. Naruto saw that everything outside of the inner circle and lines started to distort and blur as they started to glow. Then he experienced the most excruciating pain of his life, as if his skin were being peeled off and his limbs were being torn apart. "Okami. His insides were plotting." Sasuke gasped as he heard Sakura scream. The loudest, most agonized scream Naruto had ever uttered in his life was released. And the distorted stone monument of the Yondaime, staring down at him, was the last thing he would ever see in Konohagore. "What's wrong, Harry? Did you guys hear that?" "Hear what?" "Like the tortured cry of a boy, in like, another dimension or something." "Maybe you should let off the crazy juice, Harry." "Shut up, Ron, come on, you two, let's get Harry ready for his hearing, it's almost time." "Yeah, alright, my own." It was a peaceful ride back to Grimmauld Place. Harry didn't seem uncomfortable around Mr. Weasley, rather, he was so relieved that his court appearance went well that he didn't really have anything more to say. However, he suspected that the respite would not last long. Harry's scar was burning fiercely when he gasped in agony and hurried trembling fingers to his forehead. "Harry? You alright?" "Yeah, well, we're almost there, then?" For the remainder of the drive, Harry's fingers remained glued to his scar. At the moment, Naruto was unable to pinpoint the sensation he was feeling. Perhaps the best he could think of was pain. A limitless, weightless pain that ripped through his body and sent his mind reeling. It was also dark. It was dark with glints of light that could have been pictures if he concentrated hard enough. A passing train caught his eye. Parts of a huge castle were visible to him. He also noticed a lot of faces, both familiar and unfamiliar. The Kyuubi was the last one he could recall. After that, it remained dark for a while. When Sasuke noticed light, he reached for it right away as it grew larger and brighter, engulfing the darkness that huddled around him like an icy blanket. As soon as he was free of what seemed like thousands of years of suffering, the pain suddenly stopped. As he landed on something hard and clearly carpeted, a choked gasp forced itself out of his lungs, which felt twisted and dry at the moment. Soon after, he heard Sakura cough in pain and Naruto scream as they both appeared in the air before collapsing to him in angry heaps of heaving bodies, arms, and legs. He regained his breath and adjusted his eyes to the room's light before looking up from his crouch to see a beaming Kakashi reading Icha Paradise above him, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Sasuke hailed, "What, in the fuck, was that?" "Ah, Sasuke, the first to recover. What a surprise." "Damn it, Kakashi, no one said anything about the pain. It's always easier to figure these sort of things out for yourself." Not wanting to look weak, Sasuke instantly followed Naruto's lead. As he straightened himself off the ground on his left, he looked over and saw Sakura doing the same thing, but with a little more difficulty. Sasuke considered assisting her but ultimately chose not to in order to spare her the potential embarrassment. They had landed in a candlelit room with a big oval table in the center, encircled by chairs and covered in odd scrolls. A shabby bookshelf filled with books and artifacts erupting strange chakra was located on the far side of the room, along with a door. The walls themselves seemed to exude an implacable aura, and the room's lone window was draped in thick black curtains overall. It was a gloomy, gloomy place. The blonde wiped perspiration from his brow and gasped, "Where are we, Kakashi-sensei? And why did it hurt so much getting here?" The transportation circle is an extremely fast and painful way of getting somewhere far away, requiring massive amounts of chakra and ripping a hole in space and time itself. We, believe it or not, are in a different dimension that slightly overlaps with our own. What? It's painful because of the huge amount of chakra that's ripping you apart as it puts you back together at the same time. What? Naruto, never mind, you should have said that in the beginning. Sakura said, "So then, Kakashi-sensei, where are we?" "In an important house owned by an important organization that we will be assisting for our important mission." The mention of an organization made Sasuke tense. His brother's organization was the only one with which he could identify. What kind of organize at? When the Uchiha clan heir saw Kakashi's abrupt shift from leisure to alert, he stopped speaking in the middle of his sentence. Then he sensed a weird, active chakra that connected above them to what he thought was another room and flared directly beneath the door. "Kakashi-sensei, wa?" Naruto started to say something else, but the aforementioned Junin interrupted him by pointing up at the door until each leaf nin heard the characteristic sound of movement above them. The room became quiet and attentive. The signal was then given by Kakashi. "Aiko, Mina," was the last thing Ron heard before the attendable ears stopped talking. "What is it, Ron? What else do you hear?" "Bloody things broken." At first, all I heard was gibberish, then it just stopped working. "Well, they are prototypes. Hurry then, pull it up." Right. Soon after, Ron started the laborious process of bringing the long, fleshy eavesdropping devices in, but to his astonishment, it failed. Hermione. What? He blurted, "Look at this." While displaying the bleeding, severed end of an attendable ear that had once been its base. "Bloody hell. It looks like someone cut it." "Who would see you?" Bang. The door plodded open with a sound like the detonation of dynamite, and Hermione finished her sentence with a scream. Chips of wood fell on her and Ron's heads as smoke poured out of the new, enormous, ragged doorway. Just as Ron yanked Hermione behind him, 4 blurred figures with what appeared to be pointed steel daggers sprang into the room and surrounded them. The red-headed boy quickly drew his wand from his back pocket and prepared to head the intruders to hell after noticing their weapons. But before he could say a word, he and Hermione were pinned to the ground by a scowling boy whose dark hair appeared to fall upwards and a blonde wearing bright orange. "Naruto," announced the man with the white hair. "Hi, Kakashi-sensei." "Wakata," Ron claimed. "Hey," as he felt a rope encircle his wrists, which were drawn behind his back because he was being restrained on his stomach. "What are you doing? Stop it, help." "Sirius, Fred, George, Mum." His agitated captor yelled, "Urusei." And when Ron refused to comply, a steel dagger moved to land on his jugular. The redhead fell silent, his voice drowned out by terror and the need to devise some ingenious scheme to get away without Hermione getting hurt. Thus, he took his usual action in such circumstances. How would Harry respond? It was 7 minutes ago. "Hey, Mr. Weasley, who's this letter for?" "Oh, that. Found it in the back of the car. Addressed to Sirius, supposed to get it days ago. Guess I just forgot to give it to him." "Say, Harry, why do you keep touching your forehead?" Mr. Weasley, the stamp on the back of the letter says, "Urgent." Harry was unaware that such a movement was possible in the human neck without a driver's guidance. The car swerved wildly for a few terrifying moments until Harry finally grabbed the steering wheel to steady the rogue vehicle. Mr. Weasley snapped his face towards the younger boy and grabbed the letter so quickly that it took him a second or two to realize what had happened. This is from Dumbledore. Sealed with a fini, so it must be order news." "Harry, what if it's something extremely important?" "No, it must be important. All order news is important." "Calm down, Mr. Weasley," said Harry. "Let's just read it now and tell Sirius ourselves. You can't open letters addressed to a specific person when it has to do with the order. Dumbledore could have edited to curse anyone who opens it except Sirius." After giving Mr. Weasley a doubtful glance, Harry quickly grabbed the letter back and opened it. "Harry, no, dear Sirius," read Harry, who was surprisingly unaffected. "I am happy to tell you of wonderful news concerning our cause. I have just gotten in touch with the Leaf Ninja's leader, the successor of the late Professor Sarutobi." Leaf Ninja. Harry had only read the letter's first sentence, but he had already stopped to take it all in. "The current leader, a Madame Tsunade, has just agreed to support us in our favor, for an impressive amount of gold. Even though short-staffed." "Wait, this is ridiculous. Ninjas? Dumbledore has just hired an army of ninjas?" Apparently, Harry was aware that it wasn't impossible, even though the idea was absurd since Harry had experienced the worst shocks of his life. He wasn't particularly shocked. During the reading of the crucial letter, Harry paused to make a conjecture. She will send 4 of her best shinobi on hand now, and add on as many as she can as soon as she can. They are due to arrive. Hey, Mr. Weasley, what's today's date? The 24th, why? They're due to arrive on the 24th of August, 3 p.m. sharp. And that's in 7 minutes. Harry started to reevaluate the most devastating shocks of his life at that point. Anata wa dare dezuka? Oi, teme, anata wa dare dezuka? What in the hell are you gibbering on about? When Harry rushed through the door, or what had been the door, of the room he, Ron, and Hermione shared, he was met with an odd and, if not horrifying, almost humorous sight. He had assumed that the ninja Dumbledore had mentioned in his letter were the ones who had tied up his 2 best friends on their stomachs with knives pressed to their throats. The 2 ninja who weren't holding Ron and Hermione down consisted of a pink-haired girl and an elderly, white-haired man who had 3/4 of his face covered while reading a book with a huge red R on the cover. However, Ron and Hermione were being pinched by the blonde, blue-eyed ninjas wearing bright orange outfits, as well as the dark-eyed, black-haired ninjas who appeared to be harboring resentment. The white-haired ninja turned toward Harry as soon as he reached for his wand, but he never took his eyes off the red book. Harry surmised that it was a sacred ninja manual of some kind. Mr. Weasley had trusted Harry to handle the ninjas by himself, so he had sent for Sirius. Harry was a little slow to notice how completely out of character Mr. Weasley had suddenly become and how completely bizarre that last sentence sounded. Harry came to a halt without moving abruptly. Presumably, the ninja with white hair gave him a doubtful eyebrow raise. His face was nearly hidden, so it was difficult to tell. When Ron claimed, Harry, his dark-haired captor gave him a menacing shake. Surprised, the white-haired man repeated, Hari? Pateru Hari? He had yet another shock to add to his list of the worst shocks of his life, which was growing longer every day. Harry frantically pointed to himself and claimed, What? Oh yes. I'm Harry Potter. He was relieved that his well-known name might have protected him from the ninjas who had started talking in low voices among themselves. They appeared to agree on something, and then the room fell silent once more, save for Ron's manly whimpering. Then the white-haired man gave a brief order, and the 2 boys backed away from Ron and Hermione's prone forms, severing the rope in the process. After being freed, his 2 friends scurried up behind Harry. Gomen Nasai, Pateru-san, claimed the girl with the pink hair as she walked up to Harry, who was so thick-spoken that he could hardly recognize his own name. Then, slowly and clearly, she pointed to herself and said, Haruno Sakura. Then, like the other ninja, she pointed to the dark-haired boy and repeated the process for his name. A grunt. Uchiha Sasuke. Uzumaki Naruto. A wave of enthusiasm. A page turn. Kakashi-sensei. The only word he knew was, sensei, and that was only due to the Karate Kid in the media. Haruno Sakura had just finished introducing herself and the other shinobi when Sirius, wand in hand and appearing to be having more fun than he had in years, plodded through the enormous hole in the wall that was now a door. He hailed a quick, sighted breath and said, Oh, Harry, you didn't go to Azakaban? That's good. Aretha ninjas here. Thanks for the concern, Sirius, ninjas. The aforementioned people turned their last remaining focus to the slender, long-haired man who was standing in front of the enormous hole in the wall and gestured for them to follow him out of it. Harry was forced to follow. He also found himself dreading the Nate school year as he filed out of the room with the witch, ninjas, and wizards. To put it simply, Naruto was a huge, incredibly stupid fool, and everyone in the Hidden Leaf had that thought. Not just Sakura and Sans hidden waterfall, the secret mist, the bird country. In parts the entire rock country, not to mention any other little towns, households, structures, or fruit stands he had happened to stumble upon. He didn't realize that everyone was aware. Additionally, Sakura genuinely believed Naruto had odd and striking resemblances to Foe S, despite the fact that this observation was entirely unrelated, not with the wit. His intense curiosity, the way he squeezed his eyes shut when he smiled, his blinding, orange outfit, and of course, the whiskers. However, the fact that Naruto pulled down a curtain that was hanging in the dark hallway out of pure, naive curiosity had nothing to do with these odd parallels or the evaluation of Naruto's intelligence. Why? Is there anyone who truly knows? Number. Sasuke couldn't stop him, Sakura didn't see it coming, and Kakashi didn't give a damn. He pulled down that damned curtain, and not even Haku, the Grand Ice Demon Speed King in all his feminine splendor, could stop him. And apparently there were cursed paintings hidden behind damned curtains, since all demons detested light. The painting had likely started to screech in an unholy, malevolent manner after being opposed to it. Sakura frantically performed purification hand seals to shield herself from evil demons speak as Naruto began yelling the Japanese equivalent of, "The power of Christ compels you. Naruto. You idiot. That's a demon painting." Sakura exclaimed, while Sasuke watched in the background. Kakashi-sensei, the red-headed man with glasses, and the slender, long-haired man had to pry the strangely obstinate curtains shut. Naruto yelled, "This house is awesome," before vanishing into what looked to be the dining room. "When I hear the word, ninja," Harry said, gesturing to the four figures consuming buttered scones at the end of the dining table, "this is not what comes to mind." At his abrupt statement, Ron and Hermione both turned their faces languidly toward Harry. The fact that they both appeared to be somewhat okay with being nearly carried away and killed by ninjas struck him as strange. "Oh, I've been meaning to ask you, Harry, what's a ninja?" "You're asking me now? Oh yeah, you're right, I could have asked when I was tied up on the floor of my bedroom with a knife at my neck, Hermione answered Ron's question in order to divert the discussion from their recent near-death experience. Ninjas are like warriors, generally from Japan, who are trained from birth in the ancient art of shadows, serving people who pay them. Harry drew lead. "Well, gee Hermione, now that you put it that way. That has Death Eater written all over it," Ron said, his expression instantly shifting from one of curiosity to one of horror. During that moment, Mr. Weasley burst through the door, looking breathless and excited. "Quiet. Quiet everyone. We need to discuss business with our guests." "Dad, it's not like you can understand what they're saying, anyway." Mr. Weasley appeared to have finally understood something. "Ron. Get your mother, I just remembered something." "What? Mum speaks gibber." Crossly, Hermione corrected, "Japanese." "No, she's great at charms, so she has to know a translation charm." Harry and Hermione both had the same expression on their faces, which said it all. The worst is not yet over, and they were right. Sasuke didn't have to watch Sakura and Naruto battle for supremacy to know who would prevail, and it was overscones, a delicious, buttery, and not overly sweet pastry. Today he wouldn't die before saying that, though. But for the sake of the mission, he only had one delicious scone. He was too preoccupied with observing the Hari boy with his extraordinary peripheral vision to eat anything. Perhaps he was actually reading porn? A bastard. Soon after, the red-haired boy brought down a big, red-haired woman who was likely his mother. To Sasuke's mild astonishment, the woman was carrying a stick. They were cautioned by the Go Dame to treat a stick in the face the same way you would a kunai, which is to not let it go very far. However, if it did, observe its movements and adjust your attack accordingly. Sasuke said, "Kakashi, she has a stick," just loud enough for the Junin to hear. "Yes, I see. I was told not to take alarm from the people residing in the house." "Then why did we attack them?" Silence followed Sasuke's response, and then a page turned. The Uchiha clan heir chose to concentrate on the big woman approaching him rather than his sensei, who didn't seem to be entirely correct, not that he ever did. She appeared to greet them in some way, drawing Sakura and Naruto's attention, and grinning at them when Naruto flashed his enormous, signature grin that said, "I don't know what the hell is going on, but I'm happy anyway." Sakura returned the cautious smile. The woman used this as a pretext to wave her stick in whatever way she had in mind. Sasuke was a little annoyed by the thought of her coming all this way to wave a stick. But then she spoke and 4 button pins appeared out of thin air, giving them one each despite the fact that Sasuke's button featured a purple smiley face. They obeyed her gesture, which encouraged them to put them on. "Kakashi-sensei, why does mine have a boot on it?" Sasuke had a sudden realization that he liked his purple, joyful face if it wasn't a boot, that is. "All set. Do you understand me now?" Sakura dropped the scone she had just grabbed, Kakashi turned a page, and Naruto fell out of his chair. However, Sasuke maintained his composure and instead gaped a little. Naruto exclaimed, I can understand you," as he stood on the ground. "Ah, I'm speaking some strange, gibbery language. How is this happening?" "Dear," she said with a knowing smile, "the button pins translate what you are saying, so that you speak our language, English." Naruto jumped up from his spot on the floor and exclaimed, "That's amazing. What else can you do? I want to learn that jutsu too." "Learn?" the woman asked, a little surprised. "Well, dear, if you really want to, then I'm sure I can find some time in my busy schedule to teach you some things, but for now, I have to deal with cleaning the house." She then let out a dejected sigh in an overly dramatic manner before adding, "Alone." Naruto promptly concealed his disappointment with a smile, to which the woman replied with one of her own, requesting that they address her as Mrs. Weasley. The only people left in the dining room after the woman left were the 3 children they had previously encountered in the upstairs ambush and, he assumed, Mr. Weasley. The room became uncomfortably quiet. Sakura was the one who initiated contact with a kind tone. She approached the girl with the bushy hair and said, "Ah, we're really sorry about tying you and your friend up." The boy with the red hair coughed angrily, and threatening to kill you. "That's quite all right. Mistakes like that happen, all the time. Welcome to the Order. If Dumbledore can trust you, then so can we," the bushy-haired girl said with a very friendly smile. She then turned to face the red-headed boy and gave him an evil look that might even be comparable to Sakura's. "I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. So you say your family name last, right? I'm Sakura Haruno." "Nice to meet you, Sakura." At the same time that Sakura lowered her head in a bow, Hermione, the girl, tended her hand. After a moment of awkward laughter from both of them, the room became quiet once more. Sasuke wished for any kind of diversion to get him out of this awkwardly tense room full of dribbling fools. It was a request, which was unfortunate for him. To be honest, Naruto had no idea that his request to learn the new jutsu would result in him and the other members of his 4-man cell cleaning an incredibly filthy house. "Naruto, I could help you learn some spells faster if you help me first," Mrs. Weasley Obeken told Naruto in a naive, sing-song voice. How could he say no? He couldn't. That's correct. Every time someone asked him for a favor in a kind voice and with a smile on his face, he had a tendency to turn to pudding, particularly women. However, he was unaware of the actual horrors of that house or the demonic creatures that lived there at the time. Little, sooty, flying demons, dust creatures that bit at your toes, a 2-headed crab that had locked himself in the upstairs bathroom, a goblin named Creature, talking mold, and 2 red-headed twin boys who appeared and vanished at random throughout the house, generally causing chaos, were among the things that were alive but had to be dead by the afternoon. Fortunately, though, Mrs. Weasley Obeken had put a stop to all cleaning for the day after Sasuke, in an unexpected move, Caden Housenkai ed the hell out of the sooty black biting demons and received a letter announcing that Ron and the bushy hair would be turning into what might be the wizard equivalent of Chunins. With the wizards genuinely delighted for their friends and the ninjas genuinely delighted for themselves, who no longer had to clean, the house erupted in cheers. In the midst of the festivities, Naruto noticed a smile that Harry, the boy, had put on his face from the start, one that concealed repressed emotions of jealousy, insecurity, and dishonesty. Naruto was surprised to see someone else wearing the smile that he occasionally found himself wearing. Naruto observed that he was now following the hairy boy, making the most of his rudimentary stealth abilities. Eventually, he had encountered a bored Sasuke conversing with a delighted Sakura, most likely because Sasuke was speaking this time, and the two of them started stalking Harry together. Naruto observed him addressing a variety of people while using the word prefect numerous times. He also witnessed Harry frowning at his red-headed friend on multiple occasions, and he saw the strange wizard with the crazily deviant blue eye that whirled in its socket show Harry a picture at random. Then Harry ECUSED himself up the stairs while wearing that same, cloned smile. All that Naruto and his cellmates could do was follow, up the stairs and hallway, past the staring paintings with their eyes searching, down 3 doors to the left, and then burst through the doorway, which this time brought them face to face with a dying Ron, who changed into a dying Mr. Weasley, then a red-haired boy, and then a dying Harry. Mrs. Weasley. At a pace that might have impressed Lee, Harry ran to the side of a huddle. Sobbing Mrs. Weasley Obeken. Soon to follow were Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto. "What the hell is going on?" exclaimed Naruto, incredulously. "Don't panic, it's just a henge, we can take care of him easily." The dying red head changed completely when the hairy boy, perhaps in a heroic moment, leapt in front of Mrs. Weasley Obeken. However, Naruto was unable to determine whether it was a henge or if it had simply returned to its potential original form. Covered in a black, tattered cloak, the tall, skeleton thin creature chilled Naruto's bones and, it seemed, Harry's as well. Its phrase fluttered in the windless room. The other boy appeared motionless, his mouth open and his eyes wide, but as he reached for his wand, his expression changed to one of determination to his defense. However, Sasuke leapt in front of Harry before he could even start to display any emotion, even something as simple as surprise. After he fired Itachi with his wide, angry eyes, Sasuke's entire body tensed up in an instant, from the hair on his head to the toenails on his feet. Amid the blue electric glow of a developing Chidori, Itachi, in his black and red cloud Akatsuki cloak, gazed at his younger brother, his somber face blank. Naruto's heart skipped a beat as 1,000 birds sang. Then, as the older brother was about to attack, Sakura leapt between the two Uchiha, her arms outstretched in an attempt to form a human shield. When Sasuke found himself looking directly at himself through the intersection of Sakura's neck and shoulder, his agonized anger transformed into confusion while studying his other self. Sasuke's Chidori perished in his palm with dark curse marks creeping from the seal and curling around the left side of his body. The duplicate's eyes were red with the Sharingan, and he was grinning menacingly. Being the only genin who hadn't rushed forward to save someone, Naruto knew what was about to happen and did just that. But what he saw did not surprise him. The Kyuubi. In the room that was silent, he saw the Kyuubi's evil, laughing eyes, all 9 tails lashing, and a thick red chakra that licked the air around them before vanishing like steam from a bowl of ramen. Naruto fell to the ground as his knees gave way. He noticed that Sakura and Sasuke were also turning their heads away from the Kyuubi. He didn't want to scream even though his body was burning with the same pain he had felt during the circle transmutation after putting his arms around his body. Naruto returned his focus to the Kyuubi. However, he recognized himself with red, tainted eyes and viciously elongated fangs. He saw himself with a familiar pain depression, shirtless, clutching the swirling seal on his belly so tightly that it dripped blood. Ridiculous. In a puff of furling smoke, he disappeared. Harry was unable to breathe, talk, or comprehend what was going on. Silently, he watched as Sasuke, a dark-haired ninja, leapt between him and the boggart. He saw the creature transform from a young boy no older than Bill into a monster foe, then a deranged Sasuke, and finally Naruto. Then he disappeared and turned into the moon. Shortly after, the 3 shinobi fell to the ground in heaps. They made no sound, but it was clear how much pain they were in. Lupin. The werewolf hurried into the room with Sirius and said, "Merlin, Harry, what happened here? Molly, are you all right?" Harry hurried to help the 3 ninjas who were incapacitated. After ensuring that Lupin and Sirius had Mrs. Weasley under control, he got to Sasuke first, but he angrily muttered something in Japanese as he painfully shoved the boy away when Harry touched him. With a soft pop and a sudden appearance of curly white smoke, Kakashi, the other ninja, appeared native to Harry's startled body. Through his thin, mesh mask, the man said, "I don't think you should try that." "What, you're not going to help them your own kind?" The older man's single visible eye softened, and Harry watched. None of them would allow it. After saying those final words, the silver-haired shinobi put the red sacred ninja manual away, stood up straight, and approached his students with a sense of authority that Harry had not noticed in the brief time he had known him. Desperate for something to anticipate, Harry watched. "Get up, all of you." Sasuke could still hear Kakashi's voice despite all the suffering, rage, humiliation, and anger. Sasuke defied his trembling knees and stood up. "These are the effects of circle transportation," Kakashi went on to say. "When traveling through space and time you would, of course, see images of the moments of space and time that you overlap with." Sasuke claimed, "What, does this have to do with anything? Did you see images during the transportation, Sasuke?" Sasuke took a moment to reflect. He believed that he had. "And what did you see?" "My brother, a castle," he whispered thoughtfully, glancing at Naruto, who was still crouched, before continuing, "and the Kyuubi. You will feel the effects each and every time you had a brief connection with this dimension during the transportation." "Each time? All of them as bad as this one?" "No, they will get steadily less powerful. The first one is always the worst." Sasuke felt the pain start to subside and straightened up a bit more. However, he felt worse on the inside the better he felt on the outside. His sibling, what genjutsu allowed him to see the last person he wanted to see, his brother's image, his only surviving relative, and the source of his instability? Kakashi. Why did that creature was a genjutsu monster, and takes the shape of a person's greatest fear. The humiliation and anger plotted in Sasuke's stomach like dynamite. Was his older brother the source of his fear? No, it wasn't like that. He had no fear of anything, including his older brother. His goal was to murder his older brother. Sasuke detested him, his voice, his coat, his girly hair, his purple fingernails, his face, and the thought that he would never be able to defeat him were all things he detested. The realization caused Sasuke's eyes to narrow. He feared failure more than he feared his brother. Recalling the intense anger he experienced when he battled the blonde on the hospital roof just a few days prior, Sasuke watched in blankness as Naruto lifted Sakura off the ground. He recalled the shame, the hatred, and his savage desire for power. Being weak was the only thing he was afraid of. That creature was a genjutsu monster, and takes the shape of a person's greatest fear. Naruto felt himself almost chuckle without a laugh from where he was on the ground. Fear? Yes. Exactly. Naruto knew that the Kyuubi's eyes were fearless, so there had to be more to it. Naruto had known what that monster did from the start. However, he was certain that he wasn't scared of that bastard foe. He knew that Sakura wasn't scared of Sasuke, and he knew that Sasuke wasn't scared of his brother. Furthermore, the Genjutsu monster had confronted him with both himself and the Nine Tails. Naruto felt more pain than 10,000 transportation circles at the mere thought of him losing control, carrying the Kyuubi for everyone to see, and then being left all alone and abandoned once more. It was his weakness, not just his fear. Feeling exhausted and heavy, Naruto pushed himself off the ground and assisted Sakura in standing up. She smiled and nodded gratefully at him. He returned the smile. But beneath the sloppy smile was nothing but the black, sinking feeling of his powerlessness. After the Boggart incident, Ron didn't realize something for a full day. Hey, Harry, school starts tomorrow, right? Yeah, it does. Aren't those three, like, posing as students? I suppose so. Then don't you think they should blend in a bit? Ron yelled after making a broad gesture over a scowling, a bright orange-clad, and a pink-haired ninja. Harry's eyes widened. He had never considered it before, but the ninja trio was supposed to fit in at Hogwarts despite knowing very little about the wizarding world, lacking wands, and having a homicidal appearance. He claimed in a helpless panic, they'll never survive a day. A furious Naruto shot back, Oi! If there's one thing that we can do, it's survive. If I can complete the Chunin with all my limbs, then I can go to school. The pink-haired girl, whose name occasionally escaped Harry, agreed. Kakashi-sensei said Tsunade no Bakken had all our books and clothes out of the way, so now all we need to do is get a stick. Sakura. There's a tree outside, so. Wait. Ron screamed in a hysterical tone. These are not just common sticks that you can pick up off the ground. You have to get yours fitted at a special store. Fitted sticks, that you buy at a special store. If this is a world of specialized sticks, then the school must be outrageous, Naruto said, blinking at him in confusion. Ron gave up. Harry got up from the couch and led the group of shinobi out of the living room where they had been staying. You know what? He said. We'll show you. Come on, Ron. Get your mother. Ron eagerly complied, shouting, Mum. Over and over until she finally showed up, agitated and ruffled. Mum. What? Harry wants you. The biggest whole body twitch ever seen was Mrs. Weasley's. Mrs. Weasley, could you take us to Diagon Alley? After huffing and smoothing out her apron, Mrs. Weasley inquired as to why. Because the ninjas don't have wands. Before you could say, whiplash, Mrs. Weasley had everyone in the car and heading to the Leaky Cauldron. All right. We're here, everyone. Naruto uttered the question in an unimpressed monotone. Where exactly is here? The Leaky Cauldron. So, they sell leeks and sticks joy. Now, Naruto, replied Kakashi, there must be something more to this smelly, dirty, dark and nasty pub. Ron yelled, stop. Just stop. If anything can impress you, it's Diagon Alley, so you just wait. Naruto rolled his eyes and entered the pub with his group in tow. After Kakashi, Harry entered last, grinning at the bartender as the group headed toward the back of the pub, directly into a dead-end alley. Naruto whispered to the pink-haired girl, a dead-end alley, this place is more impressive than I thought. Ron gave him another great, full-body twitch, but this time it was from him. Mrs. Weasley pulled out her wand and exclaimed, all right, look alive. We're about to enter. There was initially silence as Mrs. Weasley tapped her wand on the wall's bricks while Harry observed an uninterested Naruto. Then there was the sudden sound of hundreds of bricks scraping together as they formed a door by overlapping one another. Yuwa. The Diagon Alley door. Ron, now that we're here, we can look for your prefect present. And Harry believed that this was making him feel better. From the depths of Harry's subconscious, a horrible, mid sense of inferiority and jealousy boiled its way to the surface of his mind and then bobbed. But he pushed it back down. Earlier in the celebration, he had concluded that Ron's selection as a prefect was not his fault. Everyone else was to blame as he watched Ron frantically running from broom store to broom store, comparing clean sweeps and comets with enthusiasm. He muttered curses to himself, hoping that his jealousy wasn't just confused hatred. Harry turned his face away in embarrassment and closed his eyes, hoping the troubling thoughts would leave his head. He bumped into someone, forgetting he was on a crowded walkway, and quickly and politely apologized. But the response he got as a result was completely unexpected. Mendoku's, Naruto had to acknowledge that he was profoundly impressed. Mrs. Weasley Obeken tapped the bricks to make a door to the Diagon's alley with her stick, or wand as Ron liked to call them. Even Sasuke, who had been silent since the genjutsu monster, appeared a little taken aback. Upon reflection, Sasuke had been more aloof than normal following their altercation on the hospital roof. Naruto was also concerned, despite his reluctance to acknowledge it. When he saw Ron jokingly running between two stores while yelling something about brooms, he pushed the idea to the back of his mind. Sticks brooms. Ron was a lot of fun to watch when he was upset and easy to amuse. Now that Naruto considered it, Diagon Alley reminded him somewhat of Konohaga's main market square. It was busy, noisy, and packed with people going about their daily lives here. However, they didn't run down to the market for a few kunai. Nobody was yelling jutsu. Nobody was jumping from roof to roof. There was no sound of distant sparring. The familiar clank, clank, and no guy were enforcing absurd self-imposed penalties. Naruto became aware of his homesickness as he followed Mrs. Weasley Obeken down this unfamiliar alley. And the idea of a year-long mission in such an unfamiliar location did nothing to alleviate the feeling. He grinned and let out a sigh. He could smell Ichiraku's ramen shop, feel the cool Konoha wind on his face, and hear, if he closed his eyes and focused hard enough, Mendoku's Shikamaru. Naruto, who could have sworn he heard the newly appointed Chunin, was left outside after Mrs. Weasley Obeken announced their destination, an old, dilapidated-looking store, and went inside with his team. I'm not that homesick, Naruto thought. Naruto caught sight of Shikamaru, who appeared to be a little agitated as he emerged from the crowd, wearing a green flak jacket and a ponytail full of tall, spiky hair. Despite being less than 10 feet ahead of the Chunin, Naruto jumped in the air and waved his hands to get the Chunin's attention. Shikamaru! He cried. Shikamaru, over here! The other boy approached the blonde wearing orange with a startled, then uninterested, expression. But I think I lost Choji and the others bumping into some idiot, he smirked and said. Oi, Naruto, didn't think our teams would meet up so soon. He glanced around, noticing something was missing, and asked, and what, you lost your team too? He took the other boy by the arm and dragged him toward the entrance of the wand store. No, the smiling blonde said, they went into the wand store, and come on. We have to tell Sakura-chan and Kakashi-sensei that you're here. Wand store? You mean the place where you get your sticks? Shikamaru asked, looking purple-eyed. Yeah. He added Amendoku's under his breath to highlight how problematic the situation was, saying, that's what we were looking for before we got separated. We only got here about 2 hours ago in the pub. Hokage-sama said to acquire the magical sticks on arrival, but we had no idea what she meant. How did you get here? Transportation circle. A transportation circle? Those are only used for summoning those huge, animal demon spirits. We used that port key. How did you get here? Shikamaru asked, looking as shaken as his indifferent manner would permit. Rubbing the back of his head, Naruto laughed and then sheepishly remarked, hey, it's a long story. Mendoku's, said Shikamaru, shaking his head. Before she saw Shikamaru, Sakura used this opportunity to poke her head out the door of the wand store and yell, get your ass in here, and, how did you get here? Despite the inconvenience, Shikamaru informed her. After a short while, Sasuke emerged with his arms folded and his annoyance on display. He didn't even look at Shikamaru, let alone say hello. Naruto wondered what in the world was wrong with him. The lazy Chunin asked Team 7 for help, but he didn't appear to notice, or probably care. Furthermore, how on earth did they acquire English? Sakura was left to inform Mrs. Weasley Obeken and Kakashi-sensei that their wand fitting would need to be postponed for an hour or two while the blonde ignored the raven-haired Uchiha, who was gleefully telling Shikamaru their side of the story. After finishing all the preparations, Shikamaru reviewed the surprisingly excellent, last-minute mission plans, and they set out. Sakura went to the bar. Sasuke went wherever he pleased. He appeared too annoyed to join in, and Naruto went wherever he could. Taju. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He echoed, multiplying at least 100 blonde, orange-clad figures burst onto the street, roofs, flagpoles, store signs, and the occasional uninvolved bystander, causing people to gasp. The improvised mission began with a battle cry sounded by 100 identical voices. After escaping Ron, Hermione, Mrs. Weasley, and the odd shinobi, Harry sighed in a less congested area of Diagon Alley, or, he reasoned, anyway. When Naruto ran past him, he was astounded by what he saw. It happened once, then again, and again, and again. And once more. By then, Harry had had enough and grabbed the blonde by his white cotton collar. The next time he ran past. Based on his knowledge of Naruto, he was most likely training by running around the alley because there wasn't any ninja action. However, despite Harry's firm hold on him, another Naruto repeatedly sprinted past him. When 3 more Narutos tapped him on the shoulder and kindly asked him to let them go, the boy who lived almost gasped in shock. If that made sense, Harry did at once, and the foursome scattered, leaping on shop signs, roofs, and the odd witch or wizard. What the devil is happening? Harry rushed to the more populated parts of Diagon Alley, thinking frantically when he saw yet another contender for a place on the worst shocks of my life list. His mind was left reeling. Naruto was everywhere. In addition to the 3 or 4 he had previously seen, there were at least 50, if not see-tie. They appeared to be searching for something or someone, and wizards and witches were pointing, gaping, and talking to anyone nearby about the incredible sight. Harry asked no one in particular, or so he thought. Again, what on earth is going on? Harry made the decision to stop thinking like that. A Naruto that materialized Nate to him, he claimed. It's just a Kage Bunshin no jutsu. Harry, can't you guys do it too? While there were spells that could do anything from make daisy chains to turn the dead into walking, soulless zombie slaves. Harry briefly pondered whether they actually had a spell that could accomplish such a feat naturally. They had some Bunbin Kage Y juice. Harry, certain that he had mispronounced the name, said, Naruto, what did you say you did? Kage Bunshin, it's a multiplication technique. Ah. Harry considered it. Voldemort could easily raise an army of his own if he possessed such a spell, and wouldn't Harry be aware of the spell if it existed, as he was aware of its existence? What else were shinobi capable of? Harry saw 2 Narutos jump on the roof of a broom store and a group of them leave an ice cream shop, one in which Ron was most likely. Harry quickly got over his terrible jealousy and hated himself, but he brushed it off. He had to understand what the Narutos were doing. Hey, Naruto? Harry wasn't sure if it was the same Naruto from earlier or if it was a new visitor, but the shinobi still acknowledged him. What exactly are you trying to do? The blonde boy appeared to pause, his face expressionless, as though he had forgotten why he had worked so hard. Then a broad, self-assured smile spread across his face as if in remembrance. I forgot. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed in boredom as he saw Naruto, whom he assumed he could call a comrade or perhaps even a true friend, run past him multiple times. After the first 5 minutes, he and Sakura had given up because Naruto appeared to be in control of the situation by performing a Kage Bunshin. The blonde fool managed to frighten everyone and every animal with eyesight, as well as some without. However, what was Shikamaru capable of? In addition, sprawl out on the closest bench and look for his group in the clouds. That one looks like Choji. Soon after, a Naruto confronted his lazy ass and inquired as to whether he had yet to find a companion. Kind of. The Chunin said, the irritated copy, or the actual Naruto, who had a 1 in 100 chance of appearing, then diverted his focus elsewhere to the sound of chips being crunched. In a frustrated monotone, he said, Shikamaru, I found Choji. Shikamaru slowly stood up, turned to face his teammate, gave him a halting greeting, and then lay back down, doing his equivalent of a sudden awakening, the recognizable sound of 100 bunshins popping. In fluffy white clouds of smoke, and the cries of many shocked onlookers followed. Evidently, he was the real Naruto, because the one standing a few feet away from Shikamaru's bench was the only one that didn't vanish. Just my luck. Asuma soon followed, looking irritated and frustrated, as did his lone female teammate. They said he was losing himself and daydreaming, once more reprimanding him for his inattention. Naturally, Shikamaru dismissed it and pondered whether he could locate Temari in the clouds, of course, without her brothers. Everyone and everything Sasuke could get his red eyes on had been the target of his Sharingan-ing. An incredibly ugly old woman selling love potions, with Sasuke thinking she was the only one in need of love, and shuddering, strange fuzzy pink creatures, enchanted ice cream, a man who looked like he had 3 heads but was concealing the other 2 under lumpy, misshapen bags, and other stores that had people waiting in line to enter and some that people were quick to pass up. Then, without hesitation, Sasuke punched an invisible man in the head for attempting to rob him. Sasuke thought that he would be where he fell right now, across a crowded walkway, and ruthlessly tramped on. However, the senseless act of violence did not improve his mood, rather, it made him think of home, which made him realize how weak he was, which in turn made him think of Itachi, which made him angry. The event involving his brother also made him realize that he needed to return home in some way, which rekindled the feelings of Naruto that he had been attempting to repress. What was its name? Hatred, huh? Furthermore, it was not at all helpful to repress the emotion when he saw 100 Narutos running around in front of him acting like fools. With a sigh, Sasuke amused himself by giving anyone who dared to look at him a murderous glare. A terrified young girl wearing enormous spectacles averted her eyes from his. A disturbed woman wearing a tall, pointed hat rushed past him as a Naruto replica walked away, flipping the Uchiha off in the process, and a boy with silvery blonde hair that was slicked back and a sour appearance simply returned the glare. "What are you looking at, freak? Like a cat that has been provoked." Sasuke reacted angrily to the insult. Was he genuinely trying to start a fight? Really? With his Sharingan flashing and his body tense, ready to strike out in defense, or, more likely, annoyance, Sasuke snapped, "I'm not sure, but it's looking back. Let's see who's looking after I get through with you, Kaikus." Sasuke was a little caught off guard by the wand concealed in his opponent's sleeve, as he barely avoided a bright green flash of light that projected towards him. Someone behind him yelled, "Merlin, I'm blind," as the attack struck them with the same sound that a chakra blast would make. Think of it as the random offspring of the sounds crack and zap. Although Sasuke was unaware of Merlin's identity, he was aware of the sound of an attack attempt on his sight. By the time the annoying blonde bastard could even visualize flicking his stick, the Uchiha prodigy had already removed, prepared, and positioned Sekanai in his preferred throwing stance. Sasuke grinned, enjoying his arrogance. Until a hand appeared on his shoulder and a curly white puff of smoke popped behind him with a sigh. Sasuke mockingly pondered who that might be. "Sasuke, Naruto found Cell 10. Don't waste your time here." However, the Kunai refused to move, their stubborn pride and hesitancy keeping them frozen in place. Sasuke felt his assailant's red, malevolent eyes pierce through him. He will kick his ass, that's for sure. It might not happen today or tomorrow, but it will happen soon. Behind the pale-haired, pale-eyed boy that Sasuke had just vowed to kill on his honor, another man appeared. Though not in the same literal sense as Kakashi, they were nearly identical, with the exception of the man's longer hair and obvious age, which led him to believe they were father and son. The man led the little spawn of Satan away into and under the shadowy cover of a nearby store, and appeared to give them a passive snarl. If that was possible, the brief encounter didn't even come close to meeting Sasuke's daily violence. He sneered he would kick Naruto's ass for a few minutes if he didn't currently despise him so much. He realized that the alley was eerily quiet now that the 100 Naruto replications had vanished. Sasuke was about as alert as Shikamaru, and he couldn't believe he hadn't noticed that earlier in relation to Shikamaru, too. Speaking to one of his teammates for the first time in a full day and a half, Sasuke inquired, "Why is Cell 10 here?" Kakashi took his hand off his student's shoulder and walked to what he thought was the direction of the wand shop. "Oh." Sasuke, uncharacteristically unalert and unobservant. "Hokage-sama did say that she would send as many available ninja as she could." As he followed Kakashi down the alley, the raven-haired genin thought, so that was why Shikamaru and his team were here. He could hear bits of conversation and the area was more crowded. Could you believe it? A boy multiplied 200 times? The whole alley was orange and yellow? They were jumping everywhere. "I can't find the bathroom, Mom." Sasuke let out a sigh. The Hokage had cautioned them against drawing undue attention to themselves. They were already noticeable enough with their clothing, hair, eyes, and other features, so let Naruto blow the little bit of cover they had in a crowd of witches and wizards wearing those dresses that restrict movement. Sasuke thought his current outfit was more appropriate than his rivals', but it was still striking robes. I guess they didn't have time to go shopping, though, and he was certain the Hokage had that taken care of already. Mrs. Weasley-san, her son Granger, Potter, his cell, and Cell 10 were waiting at the entrance when Kakashi and Sasuke arrived at the wand-fitting shop they had left a while ago. To Sakura's chagrin, Ino purred, "Sasuke-kun," in a way the boy believed could have been "say why. I'm so glad to see you. Mrs. Weasley-Obeken just gave me an enchanted button like yours, isn't it cute?" It was adorned with a lime green trout. Cute. The response from Sasuke could have been either yes or no. It was undoubtedly a no. Naturally, Ino interpreted it as a yes, and burst out laughing. Both Potter and the Weasley boy were amused by the scene. Angry, Sasuke walked past them and into the shop. Shikamaru yawned. Housed it. Sasuke didn't realize the shop was small and crowded with 12 people, and noisy, until he walked in, followed by the other members of his cell, Cell 10, and the 2 pairs of witches and wizards. They created quite a stir. Ino was shouting at Choji, Naruto was talking endlessly with Kakashi. Or rather, talking at Kakashi, as Kakashi wasn't responding. Shikamaru was yawning, and the Weasley boy and Granger were fighting. Sakura, however, was surprisingly silent. In addition to being tiny and dusty, the store was packed with long, tiny bows that were stacked high in the most odd and improbable locations. More of the shop was crowded with shelves containing more bows and dust behind the counter that Sasuke was standing in front of. Sasuke rang the bell impatiently. Sasuke and the other claustrophobic shinobi were taken aback when a man with gray, wiry hair on a ladder on wheels suddenly appeared. He hadn't sensed the older man's presence at all. It was odd, but in the wizarding world, odd had no meaning. Ah, the store owner grinned, some old faces and some new ones. Weasley said, Ollivander, we've got some newbies for you. Is that so, Ronald? Well then, who's up first? With the exception of Shikamaru, who presumably thought the action was too bothersome, every shinobi behind Sasuke took a full step back, if that was even possible, leaving the Uchiha standing by herself in front of the counter. My eager, aren't we? The room fell silent in response to Sasuke's words. After he moved to the back of the store and heard rummaging, Ollivander returned with a bow in his hand and laughed as though the boy had told him a funny joke. He opened the bow and handed him a black stick, saying, Try this then, 12.5 inches, willow wood. Essence of dragon scale. Sasuke held the long piece of wood, and to his great, sarcastic surprise, nothing happened. Don't just stand there, give it a wave. Sasuke waved it almost mockingly as he reluctantly followed instructions. The small shop was thrown into a state of chaos by a devastating chakra shockwave, causing bows to fly, glass to explode, lightning to flash, and thunder to roar. Ollivander sought refuge behind the counter, and all of the shinobi fled through the front door in terror, with the exception of Naruto, who was violently flung 20 feet out a window. Sasuke grinned menacingly in front of the counter, and after a minute or two of horrifying hell, the only sounds in the store were the tinkling of glass and the great, heaving pants of Mrs. Weasley, Ron, Hermione, and Harry hiding under a table. I like this one. With the agility that an elderly man shouldn't have, Ollivander leapt from his makeshift shelter and grabbed Sasuke's wand. No, and definitely not, he screamed, tossing the wand like a poisonous snake at the rear of the store. If he had had the chance, Sasuke believed he would have trampled it underfoot. Here, try this one then, 8 inches, red oak, essence of unicorn mane. Sasuke waved it and reluctantly accepted it. The outcome was nearly as disastrous as a minor hurricane. The shinobi and their hosts, however, were ready this time. With the exception of Naruto, who re-entered and was blasted out through the second window, they chose to observe the devastation from a safe distance rather than go inside the store. Since all of the wands he had already received were flawless, an agitated Sasuke asked, Can I keep this one? Nevertheless, the elderly man removed it. This is 11 inches and 11 centimeters, bloodwood, and the essence of dragon scale, Ollivander said, trembling a little, and please, he added, give it a little wave. When Sasuke waved it once more, everyone in the room appeared to wince. They didn't want the first 2 attempts to happen again. However, this time, he was surrounded by holy light while angels sang and joyful birds twittered, so nothing bad happened. At least not this time. In the background, Sasuke thought he heard a harp being played. With haste, he returned it to the counter. Take it back. He claimed. Sasuke decided to ignore Ollivander's mumbled words. Ah, strange. This particular dragon was a Naga. Been sitting in the back for centuries. Minati. Naruto had suddenly emerged, shoving the other boy aside and bouncing up and down with joy. Give me something to wave, Gigi. Sasuke sent a few more test waves with his wand, and Ollivander complied, the old man flinching each time. Naruto's attempts at wand fitting, like Sasuke's, could only be characterized as disastrous. An earthquake was caused by the 4th one, a blackout by the 5th, a flash flood by the 7th, a flaming tornado by the 8th, a fire spit by the 1st, lightning by the 2nd, a hive of bees by the 3rd, and a flash flood by the CTH. However, much to Naruto's chagrin, the 9th produced light and music that resembled Sasuke's. He had been thoroughly amused by the devastation. In contrast, Ollivander did not. A portion of his sleeve was still burning, and he was wet, rumpled, and singed. He let out a sigh and said, I figured this much. 9 inches 9 millimeters, Indian faux wood. Essence of Fini ash from its 9th death, and on your 9th try too. In an effort to conceal it, Naruto froze, letting his smile fade slightly around the edges before applying a larger one, which Sasuke saw. Of course, he was recalling the experience with the Genjutsu monster. For some reason the Kyuubi had been his fear. Was the deceased Kyuubi killed with the Yondaime? Oh odd. After thanking the man, Naruto left the store to inform Sakura that it was her turn. The other members of the group were safely across the street and away from the approaching disaster. Ollivander gave her a wand as they walked into the store, grinned, and said, 10 inches, cherry wood, core of unicorn mane. Ollivander took cover, and Sakura accepted it. In contrast to her teammates, Sakura's first wand fit her like a glove. She was surrounded by pink, glittering light as the sound of a Japanese flute flitted through the air. Sasuke gave an eye roll. Who didn't anticipate that? Nate was Shikamaru, who on his third attempt got a wand, followed by Ino on her fifth and Choji on his second. By now, Ollivander said, "Adieu," from the inside of a ruined store. Together with the 2 cells, 2 witches, and 2 wizards, Sasuke then departed. The streets of Diagon Alley would never be the same. It was obvious to Neji that it was a cup without the use of his Byakugan and still, a cup of sake. Additionally, he was able to tell that his Hokage was an unbearable drunkard without the use of his Byakugan. Hokage-sama, it's a cup. Yes, I know that, Lee, but it's a magic cup. Oh, I see. No, he didn't. Neji let out a sigh and heard Tenten follow suit. For some time now, they had been sighing in unison. Look, just touch it when I say so. This mission has only 2 parts. Look for, and board, a red train in 9 3/4. In segments 9 3/4, touch the cup and search for a red train. Tsunade-sama sighed as if she could read the Genin's expressionless, purple-eyed faces. She appeared to have had little sleep the night before that, or she was into Ikaded once more. Neji rambled, and the last thing? As the Genin's enthusiasm faded, she became a little more agitated and sneered, and the last thing? Find and protect Bateru Hari. If Cell 8 can do it, I don't see why you can't, she said. It only made sense that she would comply when Kiba asked her to use her Byakugan to look for a red train in 9 3/4 parts. It would be much simpler to use Byakugan to catch a train if it was likely easy enough to see in a train station with normal vision. After all, it couldn't be that difficult to locate a red train with cuts in it. The 9 3/4 might serve as a platform, as Shino had proposed, but there was only a 9 and a 10. The conductor spoke a strange, foreign language, which made it impossible for them to ask him questions. It was useless except for the words they might catch. Byakugan, and eventually, to Hinata's immense good fortune, surprise, and potential talent, she discovered a portal. It was made up of the peculiar chakra that clung to some of the people who were strolling through the station and the alley from which they had just come. She occasionally caught a fleeting glimpse of a red train as young people with heavy loads passed through it. Despite Kurenai-sensei's objections, Tsunade-sama had just that morning sent them on a new mission. Only a few hours earlier, they had returned from a B ranker. It was in the middle of the rock country. Long, exhausting, and dangerous. All of them, primarily Kiba, had come dangerously close to death at least a dozen times. And Hinata's first thought was a rather rude, "Damn it," which was more than a little out of character. Perhaps she had been thinking about Naruto so much that she had finally begun to think like him. Hokage-sama, however, had sent them on their way despite their most recent exhausting, B rank mission, muttering something under her breath about an irate sand nin, and upon reaching their destination, which involved nausea and a magic cup, the foursome had ended up in a rather shady pub. There, a friendly bartender guided them through a brick wall that had reassembled into an entrance to a huge alleyway full of odd stores and long, black-dressed people. Tsunade-sama had told them to look for a small, old shop in the alley that looked like a giant frog had landed on it by accident. It was not long at all. The store was small, old, and squashed when Cell 8 walked in, and Hinata could tell right away from the old, gray-haired owner's chakra flow that their unexpected arrival had silently devastated him. Kurenai-sensei left after Kiba-kun eventually selected a stick that didn't cause widespread destruction. Apparently, the sticks that fit sang and produced holy light. Her students had to transport themselves to the train station using the magic cup because she had another mission to complete back home. They had already found the odd chakra portal and were standing in stunned silence in front of it when Akamaru let out a sound that might have been a suggestion. As a plan developed in Kiba's mind, Hinata could only watch him smile. Harry was encircled by wizards, witches, aurors, shinobi, and a dog for at least 15 feet on the way to King's Cross. It had irritated him as he protested, I'm not incapable. However, when they started the 10-minute walk that morning with their luggage, owls, and other ninja weapons in tow, his protests were ignored when given the opportunity. Snuffles even appeared, marking his territory and chasing cars and cats for Harry's entertainment. The first 5 minutes went rather smoothly, with Hermione preaching about house elf liberation, Naruto talking it up with Ron, Moody, Mad-Eye, and Tonks, who would change the color of her hair every 30 seconds to keep the blonde in awe, and the two shinobi girls chatting with Sasuke, or more accurately, chattering at Sasuke. Sasuke wasn't chattering back. So, who are we looking for? Harry had been taken aback by the unexpected question and jumped a little. What do you mean? We're protecting you from someone, right? Well, yeah. Naruto politely concluded the statement by demonstrating with distinct stabbing motions with his wand, asking, if we don't know what they look like, Then couldn't anyone just walk up and stab you with a magic stick? Harry questioned why his crotch was the general target of the demonstration. Naruto, it's not like you know who is gonna just walk up to Harry and stab his crotch, said Ron. Who? You know who? Who's who? You know who? No, I don't know who. And the discussion went on. Harry was strongly reminded of irate screech owls by them. Naruto vigorously shook his head, asking, you guys didn't do any research before coming here? Like on our cultures and enemies and terms? At all? Well no, like Oigen from a hot air balloon. An aspirated sound escaped Ron's lungs, and Naruto grinned back. Harry realized that, in contrast to Sasuke, Naruto always appeared to be grinning since his arrival. He has scarcely spoken 3 words. Someone needed to punch Harry hard, Harry thought. Then, what's his name? You know who, or he who must not be named. And each word starts with an uppercase letter, huh? As a matter of fact, it does. When Harry finally said, his name is Voldemort, he got a range of responses, including yawning, yelping, and cringing. Naruto asked, Voldemort? Without considering the impact on his wizard and witches. Ron was yelling, stop saying it. The people around him started to become visibly agitated, and either Naruto didn't notice or didn't care, saying what? Voldemort? At that point, the dark-haired shinobi with a spiky ponytail approached and told Naruto to stop talking. The other pouted and crossed his arms, but he did as he was told. The shinobi with the ponytail muttered, but we need to know more of this person. This one in particular, Harry observed, always seemed worn out and, well, lazy. You know, his strengths, weaknesses, background. Why we can't say his name. Ron interrupted, saying, yeah, but the point is that he's not gonna sack Harry right here, right now. He paused to sarcastically mutter maybe, under his breath, saying, look, we're almost there anyway. Do you really need to know now? Though they didn't back down, the ninja appeared to sense the increasing awkwardness and tension that the interrogation was causing. Sakura, the pink-haired girl whose name Harry could now recall, said, but Shikamaru's right, adding, if we're protecting you, we need to know these things. Ron gave Harry a quick, almost contrite, glance before lowering his eyes back to the floor. For the past few months, Harry had been the target of a lot of criticism for lying about Voldemort's return, the Ministry's propaganda, and Dumbledore's disregard for him at his court hearing the other day. Ron was as familiar with his best friend as he was with the tip of his wand. Harry was genuinely unwilling to discuss anything related to the Dark Lord. He was experiencing guilt as well. Since Ron wasn't acting spitefully, he really didn't need to feel envious or upset with him. At King's Cross, with Snuffles barking excitedly, the topic was suddenly changed, thank God. At that moment, Harry realized how incredibly careless it was to take Sirius to the train station where he could be identified, reported, and transported to Azkaban. Harry was about to think when Naruto interrupted, how do we get to your school anyway? As always informed, Hermione answered, we enter through the gate between platforms 9 and 10 to arrive at platforms 9 and 3/4, where we board the train that transports us to Hogwarts. Oh, I get it. No, he didn't. The blonde shinobi girl, whose name Harry didn't know because she had been too preoccupied chit-chatting with Sasuke to bother introducing herself, asked, so, where's the gate? Hermione pointed to the brick wall that separated platforms 9 and 10, over there, she said. All 7 of the shinobi craned their necks in that direction. Hey, isn't that Hinata? And Kiba? And Shino? What the hell is Kiba doing? Shit. He's gonna... Gatsuga. When Harry saw 2 identical boys in heavy fur-lined coats suddenly rise up off the ground, spinning like human-sized drill heads and aiming for the gate that led to the magical platform, he nearly dropped Hedwig, which caused him to squawk in rage. What the fuck? Kiba! Stop! I think Harry blinked. The only plausible reason he hadn't seen Kakashi running up to the 2 boys before they struck the brick wall, grabbing them by the wrists, spinning them, and throwing them in opposite directions, was that he must have blinked. The most unusual sight left innocent muggles gaping in wonder. They weren't alone, though even the Auror escorts appeared to be in a state of awe. With the exception of Shikamaru, who yawned, and Sasuke, who remained stationary, Naruto, Sakura, the blonde she-ninja, and the other shinobi rushed to Kakashi. No, the word, run, wasn't appropriate. They were cutting a 150-yard gap in a matter of seconds, leaping several feet at a time with each stride. The Aurors, wizards, witches, and a dog stood looking in shock. And now that the author considers it, the word, flabbergasted, sounds incredibly absurd, and as a result, it will never be used again. Never. The first to react was Snuffles, who rushed toward the shinobi group while barking and waving his tail. Words came quickly, but much more slowly, to Harry and the rest of the party. As Harry halted a few feet away from them, panting heavily, Naruto and Sakura were already engaged in a lively conversation with the recently arrived ninja in their rapid-fire native tongue. Harry was reasonably good at Quidditch, but it wasn't exactly a sport that had anything to do with any actual ear-size. The muscles he used to hold his broomstick were, in fact, the only ones he ever worked out during a game. Nobody paid attention to the newly arrived witches and wizards until Shikamaru and Sasuke finally approached. At last, Naruto exclaimed, "Oh, Harry. This is Hinata," and gestured to a pale, flushed girl whose bangs, at the angle of her head, covered the top of her face similar to Sasuke's, but neater. Her hair was short and stuck up in the back. Now, the two untamed-looking twins from earlier, and Kiba and Akamaru, everything about them was the same, including the red triangles on their cheeks, their eyes, and their attire. The final boy was dressed in a bulky winter coat that hung down past his waist and dark round sunglasses, and Shino, he's weird. Harry could barely tell if he was frowning in response to Naruto's most recent remark. Everything beneath his nose was hidden by the collar of his coat. He reminded Harry of a vampire, in a way. Following the introduction, one of the triangle-cheeked boys, likely Kiba, spoke to his twin in Japanese, possibly giving an order. Harry was shocked when the other boy returned the bark. It's a real bark, not the kind of bark that comes from an angry retort similar to a dog. Once more, Harry discovered that the barking twin popped, vanishing into a cloud of white, fluffy smoke to become, and that everyone else around him who wasn't a shinobi was shocked into silence. A little white dog. Once more, Snuffles was the first to recover. He barked at the little white dog, who responded. They were experiencing a discussion. "Okay," Ron said, "what the hell?" While speaking to the pale girl, Naruto, who had evidently forgotten all about the boy he had been hired to save, gave Ron a questioning look. "You don't have Henge no Jutsu either?" "No, we don't." "Mo, then what do you guys have?" "Well, we have a potion that does that." "Does it taste like chocolate?" "No." "Then it sucks." By this point, Ron was so frustrated that he was about to rip out his hair, but instead of plotting into a fit of hysteria, he picked up his bags and bounded through the gate. The girl, who was pale and had dark hair, stammered, "Nah, Naruto." He returned his focus to her, and they resumed their largely one-sided conversation, despite the girl's unsuccessful attempts to interrupt. Then a rapid stream of Japanese words swept over her. Harry finally heard his name in Naruto's frantic speech, and the girl gave him a direct look. When Harry discovered she was blind, he was shocked, again. Her irises were white and devoid of pupils, but when she had bowed courteously, she had done so directly to him, and he hadn't even said a word to indicate where he was. Harry was a little more than purple-eyed by this point. It simply didn't work that way. Of course, you don't go around asking people you've just met, "Hey, are you blind?" Fortunately, Hermione had reminded them of the time and, after distributing the newly arrived Shinobi translation button pins, she led them all through the gate. However, these featured virtuous images of house elf liberation rather than the haphazard, sentimental images found on the pins Mrs. Weasley had created. "Akamaru, here's the train, but it's in one piece." "Bark." "Yeah, Shino was right, 9 3/4 really was a platform." To save a ton of pointless detail and typing that the author really doesn't feel like doing at 12:39 in the evening, they boarded the train after Mrs. Weasley gave everyone a tearful farewell kiss, even Sasuke and Shino. By that time, Harry had the strangest feeling that something was missing. "Hey Hermione, where's Ron?" The question made Hermione wince, as if she were feeling a little guilty. "Sorry Harry, but we're supposed to meet up in the prefect car, you know, standard regulation." Harry's mood plummeted instantly. Was he going to be trapped with 10 ninjas in a train compartment? 11, including the K9? 2 additional questions were raised by that as well. In any case, why in the world was Ron a prefect? Regarding the second one, "You do know," Harry replied, "there are only C seats in a compartment?" The only annoying thing Shikamaru could think of to complain about in his seating car was that they had to share it with Team 8, who had a dog and one loudly talkative person. With Ino at the door, Shikamaru in the center, and Shoji by the window munching old English-style barbecue potato chips, his team had inadvertently settled into their Ino-Shika Cho formation. Sitting opposite Shino was a bit of a lucky and unlucky break for Shikamaru. He was mysterious, unlucky, but quiet, lucky. At least none of Kiba's stories were dull. Even though Choji had been seated across from the somewhat annoying man, Ino had occupied herself with conversing with Hinata, who occasionally stammered back an opinion. Her intense crush on Naruto likely contributed to her unusual lack of response, and since Sasuke dominated the conversation, her responses tended to be shallow. Moans of distress and the unpected crash, along with the peculiar sounds coming from their adjacent compartment, the ping of gleaming teeth over Naruto and Sakura's indignant cries, and the distinct rubbing sound of chafing, green spad-clad thighs. Team 8 and 10's ears were assaulted by the sound of glass breaking. Both Shikamaru and Shino sighed. This is simply too much trouble. Dynamuric Enturi, ping. A whirling green tornado of gleaming hair. With a loud crash, spad and ing teeth flew through the window. Pateru Hari. We have come to protect your youth. Neville, who was seated opposite Harry closest to the window but had joined them in the train compartment some time earlier, had been given a gift by his uncle that summer. It was a Mimbulus Mimbletonia, a very rare, unkempt, pickle-looking plant found in deserts, rather than a typical gift like a train set, a miniature airplane, or anything else a typical English boy would enjoy. Their defense mechanism is highly intriguing, if not destructive. What happens, for instance, if a Mimbulus Mimbletonia is suddenly opposed to green spad after being showered with sharp glass? A foul, sticky mucus-like substance covered Harry and all the other passengers in the car except Kakashi. It smelled like sun-baked donkey poop and rancid meat that had been pureed in a blender, fed to a cat, vomited back up, and mi'd with the smallest hint of lavender. Oh no. We must protect Pateru Hari's youth, exclaimed a man with dazzling bowl-cut hair, enormous eyebrows that resembled large, black, fuzzy caterpillars, and teeth that were dazzlingly white. The two green spad-clad clones spun in dramatic circles, striking curious poses while shouting loudly in Japanese, and the car was filled with stench and general panic. Youth. Whirl. There is nothing more spectacular than youth. Spin. Jig. But there is. Gasp. Stance. Youth and hard work. A dramatic pose after a fit of crotch thrusting. Oh, Gai-sensei. Lee. Stink sap squished between them like jelly between a huge, green sandwich as they sobbed and hugged each other. Surrounded by insane shinobi and covered in what might be the second most repulsive thing he has ever encountered, after Draco Malfoy, Harry didn't think anything worse could happen right now, but he was mistaken once more. During that time, Cho Chang had gone into the train compartment. And why? Because Harry Potter is hated by God. Cho looked at Harry, and Harry looked at Cho. Only the dripping of stink sap and the different noises coming from the same pair spinning in the middle of the compartment broke the unbearably awkward silence. Cho appeared to be about to speak when the boy who lived spat out a mouthful of something clearly unpleasant. She didn't, rather, she chose to slowly and silently close the door. As soon as the door clicked shut, Harry felt his heart sink into his stomach and dissolve in a pool of peptic acid. His aspirations, his dreams gone. Sasuke and Sakura blinked in stunned silence. Kakashi turned a page, dry and clear of the green mucus, and Naruto opened his mouth to drain out the slime, his eyes watering from the stench. Why wasn't he struck? Harry thought angrily. He was starting to develop a very strong distaste for ninja. Rival, I challenge you. No, I challenge you to a challenge. No, youth. The smaller clone cried. No, after much discussion, during which Kakashi twirled, cried, hugged, and struck a number of eerie poses, he finally said. Fine. Cue victory dance. The shinobi with white hair, who appeared completely unenthusiastic, monotoned. I challenge you to a test of hygiene. The cleanest opponent is the victor. Wait for the reacted destruction. I lost. He claimed the bigger one, who was obviously covered in slime, lost. Yes, you have. He claimed the smaller, who was thick with slime as well. As the larger cried out, I must roll to Konoha backwards. Yes, you must. The smaller one claimed. He then vanished, disappearing through the window in a shower of glass and giving everyone nearby another mouthful of foul sap aside from Kakashi. Dynamuric Eitu. In the small, moving train car, where every crack and crevice was filled with foul-smelling green mucus, there was only the sound of stunned sputtering and the occasional cough for a brief period of time. However, the quiet was brief. What in the fuck was that? Naruto. Sakura. It tastes horrible. I'm really sorry, Neville said. As Naruto once more says, it got in my pants. Sasuke. And just when Harry thought there was no way things could get worse, yes, it did. A crash. Kaiten, damn it, Neville. Put the plant away. And someplace heavenly abode. God was giggling. Orochimaru-sama, the four sound have returned. Empty-handed, I presume. Kabuto. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. But not entirely, even though it's too late for the transfer. Uchiha Sasuke-kun, we do know his whereabouts. Is that so? Ready the replacement transfer and send in the four and Kabuto? Hi, Orochimaru-sama. Where exactly is Uchiha Sasuke-kun? You would be unpleasantly surprised. Try me. Hogwarts. Hog what? Where the hell is that? I dunno, some other dimension or something. The owl gave me the scroll. What did it say? Just some old guy who knew Oto-sama requesting a year-long mission, and it looks like Konohagakure's Hokage was killing off the birds before they got this far. That last one even had a kunai stuck in its shit. I can see why the Gigi's offering is damn impressive. Huh, and a sake cup, I wonder what for. Should we ready the preparations, then? Yeah. I'll inform Gaara. So, what's happening now, Hinata? Guy-sensei is leaving. He went through the window and everyone got sprayed again. Oi! Look out the window, there he is. Why is he rolling backwards? What was that sound? Lee-san's crying, and Neji-Nisan and Tenten-san just came through the window. He just activated Kaden to repel the slime. Tenten-san has the boy with the plant in a headlock. She has a kunai. Neji-Nisan can see us wave, hello, everyone. And how about now? A red-haired girl came in. Tenten threw a kunai past her head, the other girl's taking out her stick. Damn, duck, Shikamaru, shit. Get down, Shikamaru, how troublesome. When Team 5 showed up, Naruto had found it particularly amusing and entertaining, in a damaging, traumatic way. Neji, Tenten, and a ton of Obno Ious conversation came after Gejimaya and Gejimaya-sensei's dramatic spinning and posing. With the Hyuga prodigy cadening away the inevitable spray of slime and Tenten nearly killing Neville and Ron's sister after a fierce battle. The only rational members of Team 5 had crashed through the window last. Her specialized chakra blast, Ehi, was instantly repelled by Neji, sending it hurtling through the wall and into the train compartment of Teams 8 and 10. If not for Ino and Choji's timely removal of Shikamaru, he would have had his head blown off. Ron and Hermione finally decided to show up after Hermione successfully banished the disgusting green plant E. Cremant and Ron's younger sister fully understood the entirely understandable misunderstanding. Thanks to Harry, the newly arrived genin was also given translation button pins by the bushy-haired girl, which once more featured images of the liberation of house elves. How in the world was Naruto going to set it free from the lead shackles of oppression, when he had no idea what a house elf was? The fact that Hermione had practically threatened them with a stick point rather than a gun point, to Naruto's amusement, to wear those dreadfully outmoded, uncomfortable, and utterly ridiculous black dresses made Naruto think of some kind of dreadfully pushy dictator. Even further, she claimed that their forehead protectors violated standard uniform regulation. Naruto loudly expressed his unwavering belief that he would look much better in his dazzling orange ninja uniform. What the hell is right with it? Was her response when he asked her what the hell was wrong with his attire, and she had rejected such protesting. Naruto, the other shinobi, and the infamous trio of wizard hosts left after a brief argument cut short by a transportation circle attack about how important it was that orange and forehead protectors personified his individuality. Ron and Hermione led a sizable group of short, wide-eyed children away, and out of sight Harry was left with the 13 ninja, and he stared off in the direction where his friends had vanished until he entered a larger group of older witches and wizards who were walking through a forest. Even Naruto, who had sensed the slight hostility between the shinobi and the boy they were meant to protect, felt sorry for him perhaps. However, antagonism was a strong word in any case. Naruto reasoned, there's no reason not to make new friends. Hey, Harry, the blonde claimed, leaping up to the other boy and ahead of his friends, where are we going? He jumped in surprise, as Naruto often does, and said, oh, Naruto, we're going this way, but you guys still need to be sorted, so I'm pretty sure you were supposed to leave with Ron and Hermione. Naruto said, oh, what's sorting? It's when you're put in houses that fit your character after you get sorted. Your house is like your family, you eat with them, sleep with them, and take classes with them. What the fuck? Do you want to sleep with them? What did he mean when he saw you'd sleep with them? So, everyone is the same? Naruto asked, ignoring the upsetting picture of him and Sasuke sharing a bed. Well, kinda. Harry shot him a critical glance in return. That's a weird way to promote teamwork, Harry explained. In our village, you're split into teams with genins who are completely different from each other, so that way we all have strengths that pick up on each other's weaknesses, or at least, that's what Kakashi-sensei told me. The white-haired shinobi voiced with joy, ah, yes, wise words, Naruto. Which effectively frightened Harry once more. Nice to know you learned something from me. Rejoicing in the compliment, Naruto rubbed the back of his head and laughed softly, but as he reached the end of the forest path and ascended to what could only be described as a large, wide road, his brief moment of distraction led him to collide with Harry, who had suddenly stopped walking. However, it was not the road that left Naruto speechless. Whoa! What the hell are those things? It seems that he wasn't alone when Genin, Chunin, and Harry saw the strange winged creatures tethered to enormous, purple carriages, They all stared in utter silence. They were about the size of a large horse and would have looked somewhat like another one if they hadn't appeared to be the result of the fusion of a bat, a skeleton, and a dragon. Naruto repeated, Harry, Harry. What are they? With greater urgency, Harry simply gave a headshake. His impression was equally as naive as theirs. Harry remarked, they had never been there before, until someone shoved him from behind. Naruto just stared. Sasuke was the one. Referring to the purple carriages, the Uchiha crossly urged, well, get in. Naruto's impression went blank with bewilderment once more before flashing a big smile in response. Sasuke gave a slight frown. So, you're talking now, Sasuke? He quipped, geez, some dudes have sticks up their asses, but you grow trees. Shut up and get in the carriage, Dobi. As he jumped into the carriage, Naruto exclaimed, all right. Sasuke, Sakura, Kakashi-sensei, teams 8, 10, 5, and Harry followed. It didn't take long for the carriage, which was freakishly large, to be filled with the sounds of English, Japanese, and dog. Along with Kiba, Sakura-chan, Ino, Lee, Choji, and Hinata, who wasn't much help, as she wasn't much of a conversationalist to begin with. Naruto had made every effort to engage the stunned Harry in conversation during the ride. However, it soon became clear that their efforts were in vain because the lone wizard was simply not up to the task. Naruto would frequently pause in the middle of sentences to reflect while gazing out the window. After several tries, he would give up and let the carriage descend into an agitated silence until Neji, unusually, interrupted. The boy, who was then looking at the wall directly behind Harry's head, remarked, they're quite fascinating, nay. With her eyes closed, Hinata answered, they are, Neji-Nisan. Unblinking and bewildered, Naruto watched as Harry, in a very rude manner, wrenched his eyes from the window and fired them on Hinata and Neji. He stared for a long time before asking, what's fascinating? With trepidation, Neji said, the animals pulling our carriage. He later added, and I'm sorry, in a chilly, agitated tone that only he and Sasuke could manage, but may I ask you to look elsewhere? Your staring is disturbing and unsettling. Harry gasped, you can see me. He had likely also observed that Neji wasn't even glancing in his general direction when he made the request. How can you see anything? Harry asked. With my eyes? But, aren't you blind? Do I look blind? Yes. Then there was silence, while Harry, a little irate, and Neji, both furious, glared at one another from opposite sides of the carriage. However, as soon as the big carrier slowed to a clean stop, indicating their arrival, the awkwardness of the situation would end at this point. Everyone, including Harry, who had just erupted with excitement, jumped out of the car and gathered in front of two enormous oak doors with a growing number of students of various heights. Once more, Naruto was in awe. They brought back memories of the entrances and Eats to his hometown. Before Harry and the other students followed him to the doors, the entire group of shinobi took one final look at the odd, winged creatures that had given them the ability to travel with Kakashi-sensei at the forefront and Harry in a group of 13. The teams had inadvertently fallen into step with their teammates. After all, they were there to keep him safe. Shortly after, the enormous doors creaked open, and Naruto saw the silent throng of innumerable students filing inside as the view behind them gradually widened. Wonder. The word was unquestionably that as soon as Naruto entered the huge, opulent hall through those doors, he was struck with one of the most intense feelings of awe he had felt since entering the foreign dimension. There were 4 long tables along it, each supporting a different color scheme, and they were soon beginning to fill up with chatty wizards and witches. However, the most attention was drawn to the ceiling. With hundreds of brightly burning candles floating above them, the ceiling perfectly mirrored the glittering night sky. If only briefly, Naruto and the other shinobi were mesmerized. First years and newcomers. The Konoha ninja were about to follow Harry to the table he was hurriedly running to, but they came to a halt. The woman was tall and slender, and her manner practically begged for attention, like Tsunade Bakken, but colder when she was furious. She yelled, this way please, and they followed suit, joining a sizable contingent of short, wide-eyed wizards and witches. Despite wearing the alien costume of black robes, Naruto could safely assume that he and his friends appeared oddly out of place. It might have been due to their general attitudes, hair, eyes, and height. As she pointedly gave the shinobi a look that was pointedly ignored in return, the woman said, for the sake of those who may have missed my first explanation, her voice chipped with a subtle kind of agitation, I will spare another. Naruto gave his teammates a purple impression who, after all, had overlooked the initial explanation. She said, you are standing before the sorting hat, pointing to an ugly rag that was lying on a wooden stool. It was gray and sad, with many frays hanging down toward the floor so that, no matter how Naruto looked at it, the word, hat, simply did not spring to mind. She then turned away from the sizable crowd of new, unsorted students and their sorted audience seated at the long tables to unfold a rather lengthy scroll. And when I call your name, you will come up, sit on the stool where I place the hat on your head, and you will be sorted into your respectable houses. Oi, ooey, and was it someone else? Then what happens? A bright blonde head was seen bobbing comically in the center of the crowd, a hand was raised and waving frantically, and someone was seen jumping up and down with excitement in response. The group of people around him flinched together and cautiously moved away. After a few moments of stunned staring, the slender, snippy woman said, "Then you are to sit at your new house table." The question was, how can it tell? Who else? Naruto had successfully shot all expectations straight to hell with yet another question. He did not notice the looks he was getting, and his hand remained up. Well, the woman yelled, "You will go first if you are so interested in the reason." Naruto smiled as he leapt into the air, his joy reverberating back to him in the eerily quiet hall that might as well have been deserted. However, a strange thing happened as soon as his toes touched the ground. An unusually large rip in the hat opened wide, creating a mouth as it began to sing on its own. The hat patiently explained the relationship between the Hogwarts founders, the importance of unity, and the unanticipated dangers of the future, all of which Naruto and the other shinobi, for that matter, had not comprehended. The most remarkable aspect of it, however, was that it rhymed throughout to Naruto's surprise. The entire audience erupted in wild applause when it was over. At best, he had thought the little show was funny and entertaining, but it wasn't worth that much. Naruto Uzumaki. The boy's head jerked to attention and landed on the previous woman. She was calling his name. But why? How was his name even known to her? Well, come on then. With the stool that the singing hat had been sitting on, Naruto felt his legs start to move as he made his way through the crowd and to the stage. Now sit, and with a little more force than was necessary, he felt something dusty and soft fall over his eyes and on top of his head. What comes next? A ninja? Said a cool voice that could have come from deep in his subconscious or right next to his left ear. Naruto was left speechless due to the suddenness and sheer strangeness of a hat communicating with him via telekinesis. Wah! It's talking to me, in my brain. To Naruto's dismay, his outburst caused laughter to reverberate throughout the hall. Why couldn't they be helping him instead of wasting their time laughing? Since Orochimaru did nothing to help the blonde genin feel more at ease wearing the damn thing on his head, he was about to tear the piece of clothing off, but he stopped when it addressed him once more. After all, who the hell would make a mind-reading hat no jutsu? The invisible voice laughed out of nowhere and said, "Settle down now, settle down. I'm not here to hurt you or tell of your secret." Secret? Naruto took a moment to process what those words meant, then it struck him like a blow to the stomach with a single, agonizing pause in his heartbeat. On the inside, he deflated in fear, while on the outside, a broad smile split his face. Quickly, he whispered, "Hey, what are you talking about? How could he have known that? I don't have any secrets." The hat said simply, "You have something terrible inside of you. It is resentful, irate, and it longs to be set free. And because of that, sorting you becomes especially difficult." Instinctively, Naruto put his hand to his belly, his smile evaporating with each word whispered in his ear until it vanished entirely. "I'm not sure which mind to concentrate on. The vicious one interferes quite a bit, even though you might not notice it. Now that I think about it, this vicious mind that never leaves you is truly quite tragic. You have good reason to be concerned about it taking control. I can see you know, it's speaking to me, it's stating that." The audience gasped in surprise as Naruto abruptly yelled, "Stop it," and severed the miserable hat. His breath was coming in shaky gasps now, and his voice had been desperate. "Just stop. I apologize for getting carried away, but you are strong, courageous, and generally happy despite the dark memories you repress. I've decided that you only belong in one house. It's not often that I get to see such an interesting mind, and a shinobi at that." "Really? Gryffindor?" Naruto cautiously made his way over, finding a seat beside Harry and Ron. Trying to patch up his broken smile all the while before he sat down, he cast a cautious glance over to his teammates and companions, who in turn were giving him various looks of confusion and concern. This time, the hall erupted with cheering and applause, mostly from one table, and he felt that's where he had to go. When Naruto eventually sat down next to Ron, he hoped that he could put his life in the hat. Sasuke, the Uchiha boy, was secretly wondering what could have broken the unbreakable smile Naruto wore, but he couldn't do it for long as he watched Naruto carefully lift himself off the stool and walk towards the cheering table with a smile that, despite its broadness, looked particularly dull and lifeless. Uchiha Sasuke. Were they simply going to summon each shinobi individually now? Sasuke should have just Kaden Gukaku ed a path through the little bastards. It would have been easier, quicker, and less annoying. It took him a good deal of unobtrusive pushing and glaring to get to the stool because everyone in his path appeared too frightened to notice him. The hat instantly landed on his head and covered his eyes as he sat. "You're really a dark one," I said. Sasuke's hand, which he had raised to straighten the cloth covering his face, stopped in midair. What the fuck? It must have been a mind-reading hat, but what had it seen in Naruto to make the boy look so distraught? As Sasuke felt a rather unpleasant stir in his stomach, the hat laughed and said, "That last boy was your friend, your best friend in fact, but now that I see it, just about your only friend. That's unfortunate for him, isn't it? You know, I had no idea that looking into his mind would cause such a grievance." "You did what to Naruto?" Softly, Sasuke inquired. "What you intend to do to him is more important than what I did to him right now." Sasuke took a moment to process the meaning of those words before they struck him like a punch to the stomach, causing his heart to stop for a single, agonizing moment. What was the hat talking about? His scowl turned into a blank stare, and he noticed that his eyes were straying to his blonde teammate before he closed them. "And, like him, you have the potential to be something great, but, unlike him, your ambitions are leading you to a path that will destroy yourself and little precious things you hold dear. And you're just as difficult to sort as he was," the telepathic article of clothing went on. "Hat Teme. What are you discussing?" bit out Sasuke. By this point, his practiced and perfected scowl, which had found itself on his face once more, deepened into something furiously dark. "You have no right to lecture me." "That might be the case, young man, but now that I know what you intend to do to the only friend you've ever had, there's nothing you can do." The hat simply knew too much and had to be terminated, but when it sensed its own attempted murder, it muttered a few final words. Sasuke growled. He had had enough, and his hand instinctively started to creep behind his back to finger the opening flap of his concealed kunai pouch. "You were very much like your friend, but in a different way. The path you choose is obviously the one you were destined to take, but no one should have to choose a path that leads to their own destruction. You shouldn't be stained like this, young man, by this hatred and bitterness." As the hat screamed out his house name, Sasuke's long, pale fingers curled around a kunai. The hat was pulled off his head, leaping off the stool as if it were burning him, and the Uchiha boy's savage snarl was drowned out by the feeble cheering of the Slytherin table. He walked to a secluded section of the table, his robes billowing behind him, and he sat down in a less crowded section, ignoring the stern oppression of his sensei and the worried looks of the group of shinobi, not even bothering to acknowledge the other members of his new house, instead facing forward, folding his arms in front of his face, and emitting a fierce killing intent. As he sat in bitter silence, Sasuke was embarrassed to confess that every time he was able to steal a venomous look at Naruto, a silent wound developed inside of him. Sakura watched in agony as Sasuke strode to his table, a kunai in his fist and a look of intense murderous intent on his face. Sakura could honestly say that she preferred Naruto's annoyingly cheerful smile, but initially it had been Naruto who looked sick, his grin twisting into a sort of irritated scowl just a few moments after donning the hat. In all the times she had worked with him, whether on missions, lunch dates, or hospital visits, which were more frequent than one might think, she had never seen Naruto look so devastated. However, Sasuke appeared utterly furious during his turn, and after the hat was swiftly removed from his head, he stormed off in a chilly outburst. "Haruno Sakura. What, are we going by teams?" the pink-haired Kunoichi thought, holding her head up proudly as she walked to the stool, giving what she hoped was a barely perceptible jump when her name was called out in the middle of these foreigners. Sakura had felt the sudden need to carry her shinobi pride on her shoulders. She brought up a hand to move the dusty phrase of her soft brown hat, which fell on top of her head and into her eyes as she sat. "My, compared to the previous two, you have a very well-organized subconscious here, young lady." Sakura blinked, realizing that a hat had entered the mind to ascertain which house was most interested in them. "And one that's sharp, too." Sakura thought courteously. "Thank you, Hat-san, but what did you mean by an orderly subconscious?" "I simply meant that you have a sort of dual personality and are much more psychologically clean than the last two. You are also quite difficult to sort, just like they were." "Ah," Sakura thought, "Hat-san, what made them so mentally ill?" "Oh, mostly memories. I vowed not to name which ones." "I understand, yes," the hat said, "you are very understanding, loyal, and smart, very smart. In fact, you have a lot of potential. Just like your friends, you have traits from most of the houses, but I've decided you belong in just one." "And which one is that?" "Ravenclaw." The pink-haired Kunoichi felt it was the least she could do to get the despondent Uchiha boy to stop brooding, so she moved off the stool to the back and picked a seat that almost put her naiti to him. Sakura smiled brightly as her new table cheered heartily, which was, much to her delight, right beside Sasuke's. Since Harry-san had described what a house was in general, Sakura had been hoping that they could all be together in one, but as she sat there, she couldn't help but notice that her cell had been divided into entirely different houses. I mean, we're a team, after all, she thought. She had the oddest feeling that this might be a sign of Team 7's demise, not that she hadn't been expecting it, but perhaps they weren't meant to be together, or worse, Sasuke wasn't meant to be with her for some terrible reason. She was thinking back to the day they had left for the Wizarding World, when Kakashi had discovered her patiently sitting on a bench along the only path that led out of Konohagakure, and to be honest, she wasn't even sure what she was waiting for at the time. With gratitude, Sakura ignored the unsettling thoughts and concentrated on the stage, where the Nei-Ti shinobi needed to be sorted. To be honest, Shikamaru wasn't impatient. As long as he had the sky to look at, he could wait for anything, no matter how long it took. To be honest, though, this sorting was taking far too long. The Chunin in the audience exhaled the breath he didn't know he was holding. As she took her seat, he noticed a repeating pattern in the shinobi sorting. A very troublesome pattern. Ino had just been sorted, and she looked a little unnerved. Just like the others before her, most shinobi had either jumped off the stool quickly to meet their new table or slowly got up to sit in a brooding silence after being sorted, but Ino had done the first. Along with Kakashi, Shikamaru was the only ninja left standing in the crowd, with his teammates taking their seats at their new tables before him. Naruto, thanks to his enormous, annoying mouth, Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, Kiba, Shino, Lee, Neji, Tenten, Choji, and finally Ino were the first to be seated at their new tables, followed by Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, Kiba, Shino, Lee, Neji, Tenten, Choji, and finally Ino. Of course, Shikamaru remembered the order of the sorting, not only because he was intellectually capable of doing so, but also because they had gone in teams, making it simple to remember. Nara Shikamaru. It was his turn now. Before wandering idly through the crowd to the stage with the stool and the singing hat, the Chunin gave Kakashi a long look. He had to confess, though, that he was at least a little curious as to how the hat determined which house a person belonged to. He was certain it had something to do with telekinesis because he repeatedly saw the shinobi's lips moving, as if speaking to the damned thing. Whatever it was, though, he was certain it would be very problematic. Shikamaru sat, waited, and had the hat put on his head, albeit a little challenging because of his very fashionable ponytail. My. A voice in the recesses of his subconscious laughed, such a mind. Shikamaru grinned. Then it was telekinesis. I see you're a pretty sharp one. Why thank you, hat, Shikamaru thought, and who would have guessed that singing was the only thing you were capable of? Oh no, the pleasure is all mine, young man, the hat said. I don't get to see inside the head of such a born genius very often. Well, a strategist? Shinobi are amazing. A true pleasure, a pleasant departure from the typical wizard. Interesting, Shikamaru thought. You also have an arrogance that is perfectly balanced by your self-consciousness, Shikamaru said, raising a thin eyebrow in response to the remark. And it seems that you are just as doubtful of your abilities as you are confident of them as you are as a strategist. Shikamaru was irritated and felt a prick. Was this the reason why, following the sorting, every other shinobi appeared so distressed? Because the hat-obsessed fan couldn't stop talking about character defects? How annoying. I came here for business. You see, you must be able to see the pattern that my allies have been forming because you were the one who created it. The yellow house has not yet been filled. You understand why this needs to change if you truly see my intentions. Yes, indeed, it replied, but I can't put you in Hufflepuff, young man. You just don't possess the required qualities of all people. You perhaps if someone else made the request, not you. Though despite your doubts, despite your laziness, you are a great leader, incredibly intelligent, and loyal. I'm not going to change my mind that you only belong in one house. I apologize for the inconvenience. Shikamaru laughed as the hat yelled, Ravenclaw. He then moved slowly to his new table and took a seat in the back, where the other shinobi were gathered. He received a warm smile from Sakura, a small bow from Hinata, and a nod of recognition from Tenten. Once more, girls? Oh no, Shikamaru let out a sigh. He was slightly embarrassed to acknowledge that, aside from that other issue, he had been the mission's last hope for broadening their view of the school. Instead of just 3 houses, he had intended for everyone to be dispersed throughout all of them. Hufflepuff was completely screwed when it came to gathering information, and now there was nobody there. Shikamaru let out another sigh. It appeared as though no one else had noticed the rather problematic circumstance and instead appeared to be in a state of hopeless daze. Naruto, who was usually cheerful no matter what, was actually quiet and, would he dare to think, reserved. Even Shikamaru, however, had to concede that it was unnerving to have a mind-reading hat that highlighted the shortcomings that one would prefer to ignore. He clearly couldn't imagine what the Chunin were going through right now because, personally, he wasn't as broken as, say, Neji or Sasuke in reality. The two boys in question were seated native to each other at the Slytherin table, arguing in a hostile silence. If Shikamaru wasn't compelled to shift his focus, he would find it bothersome. An old man seated at what he believed to be the teacher's table, on the far side of the Great Hall, had just called for their attention after the previous first year had been resolved. To put it bluntly, he appeared eccentric, very much so. He had half-moon glasses, a very tall, pointed hat, purple robes that were as bright as Naruto's orange outfit, and an odd aura. The man protruded from the back of someone's hand like a genetically modified nose rather than a sore thumb. The other teachers weren't particularly typical either. The hall was suddenly so silent that one could drop a senbon and actually hear it as soon as he stood up and raised his arms in a gesture. Senbon was also very difficult to hear. To our newcomers, the man said with a smile on his face and a ringing voice, welcome. To our old hands, welcome back. There is a time for speech-making, but this is not a tuck-in one. The shinobi appeared purple-eyed, and laughter erupted throughout the hall. However, Shikamaru had to ask himself, tuck into what? An incredible amount of food appeared out of nowhere and suddenly he plotted on his table. Neither the wizards nor the shinobi had received any warning. Kiba squeaked like a girl, sitting at the Gryffindor table. Plates, teacups, chicken, and people were all knocked to the ground as Neji and Sasuke both backflipped 10 feet in the air, over the Ravenclaw table, and onto the horrified Hufflepuff table. Tenten surrounded herself defensively with roughly a dozen weapons of varying sizes and levels of precision. Choji was on the verge of having an orgasm. Shikamaru's eyebrows went up. A pregnant pause smothered the hall as all conversation screeched to a stop. Difficult? Yes, a bit. Perhaps. After blinking, Naruto noticed food, an abundance of food. He blinked once more and saw Neji and Sasuke standing on the yellow table, ready for battle. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow as he noticed Tenten covered in sharp objects. Harry also started to look noticeably paler. But he couldn't hold them responsible. It was unpected. The shinobi was startled into defending themselves when the food appeared out of nowhere and in a sudden burst of immense chakra. However, the bewildered silence that hung over the hall was torn away with enough force to destroy a lesser country as soon as the initial shock subsided. An ecstatic Lee claimed, yes Neji, plotting with youth. Sasuke-kun. Get down. Tenten, put those away. Choji? Chew first, damn it. What would Shikamaru say? Difficult? Yes, a bit, perhaps. Sasuke was standing on a table that wasn't his own when he saw a flash of silver and felt a sharp spike in chakra. He wasn't sure why. Wondering at Sakura's command, he put the kunai away and jumped off the yellow table with Neji, regaining about a third of their previously lost dignity. Had they really just reacted that way to magical food? Oh, no. From the corner of his eye, he saw Kiba trying to maintain his manliness, Lee trying to swat the barbecue out of Choji's windpipe, Tenten summoning her many weapons, and a familiar blonde wizard from the Slytherin table giving him a disbelieving look. He decided to ignore his observations and sit down with Neji amidst the nearly deafening cacophony of e-sided and purple-eyed conversation from the students and, Sasuke surmised, the teachers. The particularly strange man from earlier, wearing the half-moon glasses and the bright, glittering purple robes, rose to his feet reluctantly. The room became quiet as he raised his arms once more. He stated, I was going to wait to introduce our new, foreign e-change students, but it seems they have left me no choice in the matter, with an obnoxious gleam in his eye that would have been interpreted as malice if it had come from anyone else. He smiled a little wider and said, please welcome our new students and treat them as you would treat your own. The shinobi then stood up, with Lee yelling, Yash, and Naruto waving. I would like to introduce Rock Lee, Choji Akamichi, Kiba Inuzuka, and Naruto Uzumaki at the Gryffindor table. The girls all got up, grinned, and waved or bowed as they said, also Sakura Haruno, Hinata Hyuga, Tenten, and Shikamaru Nara at the Ravenclaw table. Anticipate Shikamaru, who appeared to be about to nod off in his mashed potatoes. Sasuke had to question whether Tenten had a last name at all. Only Ino, who got up and burst out laughing, responded to the final brief list of names, and last, but not least, Sasuke Uchiha, Shino Aburame, Neji Hyuga, and Ino Yamanaka at the Slytherin table. Before the man spoke again, There was a half-minute of excited conversation and neck craning as people tried to get a better look at the new students. They have come from a faraway land, where their head mistress so graciously allowed us to import a few of her unique and extremely talented students to our school. Please make them feel at home. Sasuke didn't understand the last words, tuck in, at all, but the man sat, and the sounds of forks, knives, and spoons scraping plates filled the air. Sasuke saw how he and Neji eyed the food before savagely stabbing it with a fork. It was strange, but it didn't look or smell bad. The Hyuga skewered something with a butter knife and asked, eating it? No you? Hokage-sama couldn't pay me nearly enough. At 5 in the morning, Harry had been lying on his back in his room, a little irate. The faint snores of Ron and Naruto, the sound of light rain hitting the window glass, and the small voice in the back of his mind that warned him something was amiss were all sounds he was listening to. It was another nightmare for him. Snakes. There were many snakes, shadows, and blood. Things that he hardly ever saw in his dreams. His scar was pulsing in a throbbing pain when he woke up, but he didn't wake up with the start he usually did. With the exception of the shinobis and the new defense against the arts teacher's introduction, the feast wasn't particularly noteworthy. The teacher was small, obnoxious, and wore a bright pink bow that didn't really draw attention to her big, bulbous eyes. Her speech was lengthy, dull, and full of fancy words that only Hermione could understand. As a result, people's attention spans had decreased, and at one point Naruto even removed his translation button pin, saying it was broken. Following the removal of dessert from the tabletops and the dismissal of the students to their dormitories, Hermione and Ron departed with the new Gryffindor first years and ninja, introducing them to the castle and outlining its rules, regulations, and potential hazards. The moving staircases had startled them, causing Naruto and Lee to fall more than a few times. The fat lady portrait had irritated them, insulting Naruto and Lee's pronunciation of the password, which was regrettably Mimbulus Mimbletonia, and the talking paintings had astounded them, causing them to fall behind constantly due to random conversations struck up with particularly interesting paintings. After being given a tour of the common area and reminded of the rules and regulations, they were put to bed. They needed a restful night's sleep because classes would begin the following day. Sleep would be at least an hour later than anticipated, though, because of issues that had come up. Wait, Lee, you don't have a wand. A what? A stick. You came straight from the train, so you don't have one. He yelled, I don't need sticks when I have youth, and then proceeded to pump his fists in the air with excessive zeal. He was immediately told to shut his goddamn youthful face by Kiba, the boy with the triangle cheeks. However, Naruto was correct. The 3 newest ninjas couldn't go to class if they didn't have wands. There was an issue. The less Harry saw the foreigners, the more sanity he was able to maintain, but it wasn't that he cared, he still hadn't overcome his growing distaste for them. After another 20 minutes or so of the ninja evaluating the situation, Hermione abruptly and finally told them to go to bed. The big one, Choji, had muttered something about just asking Shikamaru as they were going up to bed, but Harry didn't see how that would help, so he followed them upstairs and into bed to sleep. They hadn't reached any conclusions. The boy who lived woke up to a nightmare at that point and spent the rest of the night daydreaming. Even though he was certain that he wouldn't be able to sleep for the final 2 hours until 7, when he typically woke up to prepare for classes, he still tried. He had nearly succeeded. His eyes had closed and he was in a very light, peaceful sleep, but the faint rustle of blankets and the faint sound of a creaking window pulled him away. Naruto, a recognizable voice murmured, Oi, Dobi, wake up. After Naruto muttered a groggy reply that might have been an insult, more blankets rustled, and the blonde said, Sasuke? Did you have another nightmare? More rustling of the cloth, the creaking of springs, and silence in his semi-conscious state. Harry was looking through a gap in his royal red tapestries when he noticed Sasuke sitting on the blonde boy's bed, completely decked out in his Slytherin robes. Harry didn't wear his glasses to bed, so he could hardly see them. One of the figures on the bed said, Let's just go, we need to talk, but not in English because people were listening. The sound of worn springs and a window opening and closing was the last thing Harry heard before he lay down again and fell back into a deep sleep. Unable to distinguish between his dreams and what might have been real, he pondered last night's events over the empty space of Naruto's bed when he woke up at 7 in the morning to Ron shaking him. No matter what time of day he slept, Sasuke always had nightmares until he dared to try sleeping again. He would wake up at least once every night with a slight frown on his face. However, the nightmare about snakes, shadows, and blood from last night was particularly graphic. Regardless of the nightmare, he would always wake up slowly and drift to a reality that wasn't too dissimilar from the demons that tormented his dreams. Only 2 particularly unpleasant dreams had ever brought him to Naruto's one-room apartment. The first time, He was only partially conscious of what was happening until he found himself standing in front of a door he knew well. Despite his temptation to turn around, he knocked that time. Like the first time, he went on his own initiative the second time, voluntarily, albeit grudgingly, making his way to his blonde friend's apartment to sleep on an ETRA futon. Sasuke believed that their silence was a sign of weakness because they had never discussed either of the incidents. In addition to offering support, Sasuke had once again found himself by the blonde's bedside, asking the boy to train for the NAT 2 hours before classes began. The waning resentment that had developed since the fight at the hospital had been virtually eliminated by the nightmare, and on top of that, he was starting to feel stiff from not moving for 3 whole days. Naruto, he suspected, did 2 ninjas could not remain motionless for very long. Naruto agreed drowsily, hurriedly got dressed, took off the absurd sleeping cap, and leapt out the window with the Uchiha following. Both of them agreed that going forward, they would only discuss personal matters in Japanese because Harry Potter, the boy, had already heard too much. The boy with the blonde hair asked, "Wanna go explore first?" They had taken to standing on top of one of the towers nearest the window from which they had launched, gazing out at the sun rising over the trees of a foreboding-looking forest and the pink and purple clouds smeared across the rain-fresh sky. Sasuke proposed, "How about we check out the Forest of Death?" "You mean the Forbidden Forest?" asked Naruto, who was now completely awake and laughing. "Forbidden, deadly, all the more reason to go." Sasuke smiled barely perceptibly as a wave of relief swept over him as Naruto laughed once more. With only the scent of rain in their nostrils and the first rays of the sun on their backs, they leapt from castle tower to castle tower. Naruto and Sasuke-kun had arrived late for breakfast 5 minutes before the food vanished from the tables, rumpled, wet, and, in Naruto's case, smiling. They had arrived. Naruto and Sasuke sat down at the Gryffindor tables, grabbing food and pumpkin juice on the spur of the moment and devouring it as quickly as they could. "That forest is amazing," Naruto yelled loudly. Sakura ECUSED herself from the Ravenclaw table and joined them. The fact that Naruto could talk so loudly while his mouth was so full struck her as a feat in and of itself. She also saw that there was blood on one of his fingers. "It's way bigger than the Forest of Death, and the chakra feels so weird. You should go Nati time. Sakura-chan. Me and Sasuke killed something big and hairy, and we saw some tree sprites and some trees attacked us in this awesome lake, and I saw some unicorns." His frantic conversation was interrupted when the food abruptly vanished. However, that didn't make him feel any better. Rather, they both said adieu to Sakura and stood up to go. As they walked side by side out the doors of the nearly empty Great Hall and into the rain that had returned with a vengeance, Sasuke nibbled on a scone and Naruto spoke through a mouthful of bacon. She grinned. Perhaps their team would be okay after all. "I've managed to get some information on this school. Orochimaru-sama Tsunade-sama was quite clever, sending him off to a place where you probably wouldn't be able to follow. The only thing I am reluctant to do when it comes to Sasuke-kun's body is die, Kabuto, and maybe not even that." With his glasses pushed up, Kabuto had a hidden smile on his face. He held a scroll in one hand and a little pile of papers in the other. "It's true that knowledge of the school is uncommon, but not unheard of. If you dig deep enough, you're bound to hit water," said the young medic Nin, who had been rearranging his documents before adding, "Hogwarts, apparently, is in another dimension very much similar to our own. It even overlaps slightly the country our area overlaps with is called China, in a place called the Macau Special Administrative Region, on a small peninsula. If you send the 4 into a cave located just west of Umeka Samomo Port, then you will come out of another cave in Macau. Ah, good job. Send the 4 with directions to Hogwarts. Make sure they know as much as they can about this new world." Oh, and Kabuto? "Hi, Orochimaru-sama, have them uncover as much as they can about these wizards. I'm thinking it's time for me to put my new arms to work." "Hi, Orochimaru-sama, Part 1 of Forbidden Forest Omake. Naruto, don't touch it." "Naruto, I said don't touch it, but it's so cute." "I don't care what the hell it looks like. Haven't you ever heard of that saying? Mother bear is never far from her cub." After rolling his eyes at the young man with the raven hair, Naruto began to pet the fuzzy black creature that he was crouching in front of. "I'm sure it's not a bear, Naruto. Stop worrying over something so cute, and oh dear God, it bit me. Do you hear that? Get it off, get it off, get. Run, Naruto. It off, run, Naruto." Fearing for their lives, the two boys fled from a creature as unholy as Satan himself when something burst into the clearing. Uprooting trees like twigs, it was so hairy and black that it was impossible to see its eyes. The massive mouth with its enormous, jagged teeth that appeared to split the onion-shaped creature in two would be too distracting for you to focus on anything else. Its fur rippled in the forest's darkness, and the ground shook with every step it took in their direction. It's like Sasquatch and Pac-Man fused together to create Sac-Man. As Sasuke's hands shot up to form the tiger seal and Naruto cage scampered around, scattering among the trees, Sac-Man let out a deafening roar. I'll be damned before I die by the hand of a monster you named Sac-Man. Potions had been the first item on Naruto's class schedule. The little leaf nin was completely purple-eyed by this. With caution, he inserted the scroll into his friend's face and said, "Hey Sasuke, do they mean poisoning?" Angry, the other boy grabbed it and scanned the paper that Ms. McGonagall-sensei had so obligingly translated into kanji. He added the barely audible but unmistakably sarcastic word, "Great," under his breath. "How we have all the same classes," he said. "It is great." Sasuke let out a sigh. Nothing escaped Naruto, did it? Whatever, Naruto. At the moment, they were moving downward. The raven-haired shinobi could only plane it that way, stair after stairway of down. The darkness and gloom growing with each floor they entered. Both Naruto and Sasuke questioned their destination. Fortunately, they managed to catch up with Hermione, Ron, and Harry, who were traveling in the same direction to the same class. Probably the shinobi saw that Harry was especially exhausted, and they exchanged glances before Naruto started talking to the four of them in a more one-sided manner. He only broke off his frantic speech when Hermione asked them about Sasuke and his shared wetness. However, Naruto was cut off before he could respond. Yash. Neji and Lee. The always quiet and pensive Neji stood in stark contrast to Lee, who was as excited as ever after exchanging greetings. They continued their descent, where they eventually ran into Kiba, Shino, Choji, and Ino. As they descended the innumerable flights of stairs, the little group of two swiftly grew into a sizable flock of 11. Furthermore, they were starting to become noisy as well. Lee said, "Naruto, you're dripping everywhere. It's 'cause me and Sasuke were in the Forbidden Forest." "Ooh, and how was it?" Neji and I explored the roofs. "Me and Shino went around the castle halls. I gotta show you this weird mirror, Naruto." As he patted his stomach, Choji chirped, "Shikamaru and I went to the kitchens. Who knew elves were so cooperative?" "Huh. Figures you would find your way to the kitchens. You even dragged Shikamaru with you." Sasuke, who hadn't added anything to the discussion other than a grunt or two to an overly animated Ino, observed how the wizarding trio responded to the shinobi's confession. Speechlessness and wide eyes were involved. That had been happening a lot lately. Ron yelled, "You were in the Forbidden Forest," and gestured to the little blonde with the whiskers. It might have been a statement or an accusatory query. In any case, Sasuke was not very concerned. "Yeah, we were." Naruto smiled. "Wanna go tomorrow? Maybe we can poke at Sac-Man's body?" "And you sneaked around the kitchens and the roof?" Looked at Hermione, "And you exploited the house elves?" "Exploited?" Harry appeared irritated. Perhaps he wouldn't appear so if he ate more, ear-sized more, and slept more ill. "You can't just go roaming around the castle and the forest at night," the witch with the bushy hair reprimanded. Her red-haired friend added, "And you can't talk about it so loudly, Naruto." With the exception of Sasuke, Neji, and Shino, of course, every shinobi vocally ignored the remark. "I'm serious. There are rules against leaving the common room dormitories after dark. You know nothing of the wizarding world. You could get hurt, or killed, or worst, impelled." One guess as to who said that. Naruto gave this a mocking sneer and flashed his signature smile. "Oh," he said, "you're one to talk, Bushy. We heard all about you guys. Sneaking around at night, breaking into chambers, rescuing godfathers, competing in tournaments." Both the girl and the other two wizards appeared surprised. Kiba said, "Yeah, from somewhere in the rear, and technically, we're not students. We could have just been scouting the premises." When Neji first arrived, he said, "Standard mission regulation," with a casual air. Outraged, the three wizards gave up. Ron complained, whatever, we're here anyways." It appears that Sasuke, Naruto, and every other shinobi were a little purple-eyed as to where "here" was. In actuality, "here" appeared gloomy, depressing, and wholly unsuitable for any kind of educational instruction. The question that had been bothering her fellow Leaf Nin was only asked by Ino, disregarding it. Harry threw open the dungeon. Thought Sasuke, doors. "It's a dungeon." Sasuke, yes, a dungeon in front of a long teacher's desk and a chalkboard. The shinobi filed into the classroom that had been transformed from a torture chamber. The tables were arranged in a middle row. Naruto sneered. The first portion of the Chunin didn't count, and he hadn't been in a real classroom since the day he was given a cell. As recollections of Ibiki pounded him with a shudder, Naruto reasoned that this room had nothing in common with that classroom. Hermione paired up with another Gryffindor house girl and sat at a table behind Harry and Ron, who were seated at a table on the left side of the room. They were followed by Kiba, Shino, Choji, and Ino. However, Neji and Lee, as well as Sasuke and Naruto, were seated at the two-person tables on the other side. A boy behind Naruto and Lee sat down and said something about idiots and Slytherin sides. He spoke in a haughty, disdainful tone. It was recalled by Sasuke. He turned to see a platinum blonde with pale eyes who was seated at the table behind him. He played back a memory, and his eyes narrowed. By the time the annoying blonde bastard could even visualize flicking his stick, the Uchiha prodigy had already removed, prepared, and positioned Kunai in his preferred throwing stance. Sasuke grinned, enjoying his arrogance. Until a hand appeared on his shoulder and a curly white puff of smoke popped behind him with a sigh. Sasuke mockingly pondered who that might be. Sasuke, Naruto found cell 10. Don't waste your time here. However, the Kunai refused to move, their stubborn pride and hesitancy keeping them frozen in place. Sasuke felt his assailant's red, malevolent eyes pierce through him. He would kick his ass. That's right, it might not happen today or tomorrow, but it will happen soon. And Sasuke was determined to fulfill that pledge. The previous night, Draco Malfoy hadn't slept well. He had woken from fitful sleep more times than he could recall, and he was restless. It might have been the stress, but he couldn't be certain. Tension brought on by his family and the family company. Business means Voldemort. Family means his father. There was also the issue of foreigners everywhere they went. They ran. He had first encountered one in Diagon Alley. However, met probably wasn't the best way to describe it. Encountered, met, sounded too much, so encountered would be preferable. He was unaware, less combative. He attributed his out-of-character thoughts and vocabulary to sleep deprivation and the author, primarily on the writer. He would not soon forget the encounter with the foreigner. The boy was incredibly quick and of some Asian descent, though it's unclear which one because they all had the same bloody appearance regardless of where they were from. Draco attributed his error in judgment to his leniency toward the small jerk. He didn't believe he would pose a threat because the boy was defenseless without a wand. That's what Draco believed, anyway, until he dodged a he and then drew steel daggers in a matter of milliseconds. Indeed, certainly not defenseless. He also observed his eyes, in addition to his speed and ethnicity, of course a vivid red before they got into their little altercation. He was positive they weren't that color. However, his school was now being invaded by foreigners. He assumed they were exchange students from Asia. To be honest, Draco hadn't given a damn, and the insane old headmaster hadn't mentioned where. Most likely a place that produced pink-haired girls. After giving them a cursory examination, he concluded that they were boring and chose to ignore them entirely, being cautious not to express any worry to the people who had infiltrated his home. Furthermore, in potions, on the Slytherin side of the room, a Gryffindor exchange student was seated in front of him. Not acceptable. He was only capable of so much. Hey, you can't sit here. This is the Slytherin side of the room, idiot. The dark-haired one had turned around more sharply than the other. He squinted his eyes. Draco doesn't fully recall, but he believed he saw them flash red before his head struck the back of something. He felt a pain in his stomach that forced air out of his lungs, and he was sent down by another, vicious, impact hard. He saw nothing after that. When Harry saw it, he was prepared to retract every sarcastic statement, snide comment, and disdainful thought he had ever directed at his ninja bodyguards. Sasuke kicked Malfoy in the chest, slammed the back of his head against a table, and punched him in the gut. Absolutely everything. Harry's face split in two with a triumphant smile. Ron whistled beside him, impressed, while the rest of the Gryffindors were likely inwardly ecstatic. A few others displayed visible signs of delight. Yes, exactly, he would savor this occasion. Malfoy must have said something horrible to the ninja pair earlier, but he was unaware of what it was. In less than 10 seconds, you can rely on the bastard to create enemies with a skilled assassin. However, Harry didn't have much time to take in the sight of Malfoy in a coma or the terrified Slytherins with his robes as impossibly billowy and his nose as long as ever. Snape took that moment to enter the classroom. Harry saw his most despised teacher's pale face turn red with rage and his eyes enlarge to the size of saucers. He would also enjoy this. Despite his bare-faced rage, he spoke in a remarkably composed tone. What in Merlin's name happened here? He appeared to be about to blow up at any moment. Sasuke didn't appear to notice, though instead of responding, he turned his head slightly in a nonchalant manner, which made Snape repeat his question with less patience and more force. He fell, the shinobi with the raven hair said, obviously. Well then, how did he fall? He lied with ease, crossing his arms and giving Snape a cool glare in return. I don't know, he said, I had nothing to do with it. A few Slytherins erupted in protest at the obvious lie, but the perpetrator's lethal gaze, which had reddened once more, instantly silenced them. It's likely that they were remembering that the dangerous boy actually knew where they slept. Harry saw the group of Slytherins and a few Gryffindors experience a wave of shudders. Neville, mostly. Snape squinted, but he didn't pause to consider his house's actions. He used it to command a student to bring Madame Pomfrey, Then he swooped down on the unconscious boy to demean him for any potentially fatal wounds. Before the agitated Sasuke could respond, Madame Pomfrey burst through the door, red-faced and flustered. It's hard to believe one could acquire a head injury this severe without assistance. The professor growled after some inspection. After Malfoy was led out of the dungeon and through the door, Snape went back to the chalkboard to begin the lesson for the first day, letting the classroom temporarily descend into chaos. 25 points from Gryffindor. Naruto was unable to join in on the collective cries of indignation that came from the left side of the room because he had no idea what points were. It appears that Gryffindor just lost 25 points, regardless of the reason for the points. Naruto felt let down. Nay. Sasuke. What are points for? I don't know. Stop whispering in my ear. But I want to play too. Naruto cheered when it appeared that his loud confession had earned him additional points. Take that, Gryffindor. Naruto, that's your house. Damn it. His new professor most likely burst a blood vessel in front of the classroom, and the blonde shinobi heard his raven-haired companion sigh in frustration before he spoke. He gave the class time to calm down. His robe swept dramatically as he spun around to face the chalkboard behind him. Class, he started. Don't think that this unfortunate accident, he said, straining the word and glaring at Sasuke, would get you out of your first potions class of the school year. In the rear of the classroom, Naruto heard Kiba snort loudly. He didn't blame him. The professor did look like a tall, oily geisha in the billowing robes. A tall, oily, and utterly ugly geisha. When the tall, oily, unattractive geisha impersonator tapped the chalkboard, the smooth green stone instantly displayed the recipe for the potion. A cauldron on his desk swelled to overflowing with a viscous, boiling purple liquid as he tapped it. Can anyone tell me what this potion is? The professor scowled as he asked. A certain bushy-haired girl's hand shot up faster than one might imagine a non-shinobi could do. As if on cue, she started to wave it a little. When it became clear that she would not be acknowledged right away, Snape disregarded her. This was very funny to a certain blonde genin hint. Ino wasn't the one. Naruto started to find the spastic Hermione rather dull after a few more moments of a silent classroom while his new teacher looked in vain for any other willing candidate. Eventually, he raised his wand to balance futilely on the tips of his fidgety fingers. A shadow appeared over him as he was debating whether or not to attempt balancing the wand on his nose. Oh my, dangerous, you. The shadow said abruptly, can you tell me what this potion is? As Naruto scrunched his eyes in concentration, Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Lee pumped his fists in anticipation. Kiba stifled a fit of laughter, and Ino moaned inwardly. To whom was he speaking? The professor sneered, can't answer. What can you tell me then? By this point, Naruto was truly purple-eyed. How could he name some strange purple mud when he had no knowledge of the wizarding world? Oh well, 25 points from Gryffindor. Naruto let out a moan and felt compelled to repeatedly strike his head against the table. And first period was only 15 minutes in. In summary, first period potions featured a lot of verbal and physical explosions, profanity, spilling, semi-fatal injuries, failed attempts at potion making, youthful outbursts, a newfound hatred for some greasy professors, mildly implicit nudity, and general chaos for the convenience of both Sasuke and the author. Overall, Sasuke's days had been better as he made his way through the hallways with the same group of people from that morning, he thought. All of the shinobi from the Slytherin and Gryffindor houses, along with the customary trio of wizards and a witch, but this time they were moving upward. Naruto said, where are we going now, Harry? Sasuke and the blonde were heading toward the front, leading the group of shinobi that included the bespectacled boy and his companions. To Defense Against the Arts, it's an amazing class, you guys are gonna love it, said Harry. The boy's attitude had changed since first period, and Sasuke could not help but notice it was similar to contrasting Neji and Lee's personalities that was nearly impossible on its own. In Sasuke's ear, Naruto practically squealed, really? Defense Against the Dark Arts? We finally get to see some action? Kiba continued, yeah, and it's something we're good at. Oh please, this isn't the primitive muggle fighting you guys do, Ron said. This is the real thing, with wands and guts and strategy. No offense, but there's no way you could be good at it. With the possible exception of Shino's, whose sunglasses made it hard to see, 8 ninja pairs narrowed their eyes. However, after ascending a final flight of stairs, they reached a pair of doors before shuriken were hurled or chakra pores were sealed. Unaware of the glares he was getting behind his back, Ronnie claimed, here it is. With enthusiasm anticipating this, he grabbed the handles and threw open the doors. The big group fell silent in shock at what they had disclosed. Then there was laughter. Choji, Kiba, and Naruto collapsed on the ground, choking on laughter as Sasuke fell to the ground. Naruto was holding onto his robes and making a vain attempt to stop himself from falling. Kiba and Choji were compelled to slide onto the floor without assistance since neither Shino nor Ino permitted them to do so. The large, pink classroom with its frills and lace was not nearly as funny to Lee, Neji, Sasuke, Shino, and Ino. They actually thought it was pitiful, very much so. "I can't breath." With anger replacing his enthusiasm, Ron yelled, "Shut up! We're obviously in the wrong classroom. So much lace." Ron erupted into a tirade of threats and profanity, but his tirade was interrupted by an absurd, hem. When a short, squat, toad-like creature came toward them from a teacher's desk at the far end of the classroom, the laughter stopped. The shinobi took a while to recognize it as a human, and based on her appearance, she nearly caused another round of wild laughter. Wearing girlish pigtails, pink robes, and a lovely lavender ribbon tied neatly on top of her head, she was dressed very much like the room. Her attire did not conceal or divert attention from the fact that she was, in fact, quite elderly. In fact, it made her age stand out and had the opposite effect. "Now that I have your attention, may I ask that you sit down?" Sasuke could practically feel cavities growing in the back of his mouth as she spoke in such a sweet, sugary voice. Furthermore, even though she asked them to sit down, it wasn't a formal request. With some still trembling with laughter, the large crowd obstructing the doorway dispersed and made their way to the two-person tables to take seats. This time, Sasuke and Naruto sat behind Harry and a furious Ron, while the other shinobi scattered the room, instinctively in a way that would be most helpful in the event of an attack, as improbable as that sounds. Sasuke was reminded by the attack's unlikely likelihood that this mission was turning out to be pretty dull right now. He could think of a lot of other missions he would prefer to be assigned to: getting rid of renegade missing Nin, painting the Hokage office, and weeding. As the professor announced the start of class, the last of the students filed in through the door, cutting short his list. He had only reached number 78, which involved ferrets. With the exception of one blonde wizard, every student from the previous period was present, giving the impression that they would be teaching the Slytherins again. Sasuke grinned. There was silence when she said, "Good morning, class." She was interrupted by whispers of, "Did she say a speech? My name is Professor Umbridge, and as you would know from my speech just last night," she said, "and you know what? That all defense courses held shall now contain only ministry-approved material." "What does it mean?" "No physical demonstrations, practice, or direct defense techniques are to be taught." Students who were furious erupted in protest, with the exception of the shinobi, who was clueless about her topic anyhow. But even so, Lee felt compelled to join in the yelling. Harry yelled, "Why? Why would you pull dark art defense now when it's most important?" The boy's implied words caused the professor's beady eyes to narrow. She understood what he was referring to. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Potter. Why would it be so crucial for you to learn defense now? We're all perfectly safe. There's no need to know things that you will never need in the future." Not with the return of Voldemort. His tirade had elicited yelps and chills from the wizarding students, which greatly delighted the shinobi. Neville, one of the boys, fell out of his chair and remained there without getting up. Sasuke thought he was unconscious. "Mr. Potter, I have not the slightest clue of what compels you to shout such lies, but I must ask you to stop immediately." The entire room flinched as he practically screamed, "Lies? I saw him. Voldemort is back, and if we don't do something, then we won't stand a chance." 30 points from Gryffindor, the professor said coolly. "Ignoring the problem won't solve it, lady. Mr. Potter, I must ask you to leave my classroom this instant." It took the professor numerous tries and, in the end, threats of expulsion before the furious teenager finally left the room in a flurry of black robes, and the slamming of the door after this demand was met with loud, irate protest. As furious as he was at the rejection of the Dark Lord's return, Ron and Hermione had offered to accompany him on his departure, but he declined after he left. The class was in disarray, discussing the recent events in the classroom in whispers, until Umbridge raised her hands and her voice to get their attention in silence. "Quiet please. Now, before you get too excited about the new teaching methods, much in the same way Mr. Potter did just now, I have some bad news." Ron yelled. "What? Did she consider the last bit good news?" She spat the final word out of her mouth as if it were a wad of bitter phlegm. "The ministry has decided to change the course for the sake of our new guests because of the need to keep a good image, as Dumbledore had put it, among our new guests. Supposedly, they came to experience everything the ancient, prestigious wizarding community has to offer, and the new rules concerning your safety would be stifling that experience. However, I honestly don't see why we need to revert to such dangerous means of teaching the students just for a few visitors. Yeah, because book work is so fulfilling. Apparently, the Department of Outer Dimensional Relations wanted to avoid any speculation that may have followed the pulling of demonstration during defense classes. That much Sasuke could comprehend in order to avoid giving the impression that they had purposefully stopped all physical demonstrations from their classes at the exact moment the shinobi were arriving. The wizards took care they appeared to be attempting to conceal from their guests the source of their authority, which was essentially a slap in the face. It was a wise move in terms of foreign relations. The same circumstance occasionally caused problems back at Konohagakure, demonstrating that the wizards either feared or respected the ninja. However, this also demonstrated that only wizards associated with the order were aware of the true function of shinobi in the wizarding world. The Wizard Council, or whoever was in charge, would not have bothered making such an inconvenient change merely to maintain appearances if they knew, and Sasuke didn't care, that the ninja were only there to help in the war and investigate the safety of a certain, troublesome wizard boy and his school. Anyo sa, Sasuke. Naruto uttered loudly in the other boy's ears, using their native tongue to express his thoughts. What? He questioned angrily, massaging the offended earball. What the hell is she talking about? Ask questions later, Dobi. Kiss my ass, Teme. You'll have to kill me first. Gladly. Knowing Sasuke and Naruto, it would not take long for the lighthearted banter to turn into a full-on brawl. Sasuke's taunting, even insults, had always had a way of getting the short-tempered blonde to throw a punch for the moment. Naruto was making a valiant effort to keep his cool, but he was failing miserably. The younger boy finally lost it after the Uchiha boy had successfully insulted him a few more times. He yelled in Japanese, "Fuck you, Teme," and got to his feet so violently that his chair was flung back, somehow hitting an unwary Lee in the forehead. He appeared deliriously angry during her tirade about the value of outer dimensional relationships. Professor Umbridge paused to look at the two boys incredulously as Naruto lifted his fist and prepared to lunge. Claudio. At the sound of the professor's outburst, Naruto froze, his eyes widening literally. Naruto was unable to control himself after Sasuke had just said something particularly hurtful, something about orange being a color that represents failure. He screamed in anger, threw his chair, and lunged at the other boy, preparing to strike his cocky little face. However, he was abruptly stopped. He was unable to move after the professor yelled an odd word, leaving him motionless. He could not take his eyes off of Sasuke's stunned expression or his stun, which wasn't much, as he would allow it to appear. How dare you attack this innocent Slytherin boy? I will not tolerate Muggle fighting in my classroom. After telling her to fuck off, Naruto would have been happy to ask her what a Muggle was if he could have made his lips move rather. A growl of agitation tore through his throat. The professor held him in confined suspension for a few more seconds before flicking her wand to let the blonde boy fall on his face with a loud thud. I pecked to see you in for a week's detention. Young man, both you and Mr. Potter can keep each other company. You can also comfort yourself in the fact that you just lost your house 25 more points. With a groan, Naruto rose from his spot on the ground and took his seat again, which Lee had brought him, nay-tea to that cocky little jerk Sasuke, whom Naruto had kicked beneath the table as soon as he had the opportunity. It was only the second period of the first day, much to the chagrin of all the shinobi. Though he wasn't entirely sure why, Gaara had the weirdest feeling that he was being put out. The cup had taken him and his siblings to a wizarding market, where they were getting incredibly grating looks while trying to find a decimated stick-selling shop. Damn wizards and their ambiguity. He made his face a darker shade of nonchalant, and crossed his arms a little more tightly as they entered a small dusty shop that looked slightly as though it had been crushed by a giant, centuries-old toad. The wiry man behind the counter gazed upon the three with the deepest horror and dismay, and Gaara watched with sly amusement. Now that he had an entire new continent to demonstrate his existence, the red-headed Sand Nin was ecstatic. He would use this mission to its fullest. Part 2 of Forbidden Forest Omake. Ooh. What are those? Oh my god. I am certain that Naruto is not so foolish as to rush up and touch something that could kill us once more. I want to touch them, Naruto, damn it. Those Naruto was referring to resembled the stickbugs from his childhood, but they were a little larger and more humanoid, like the stickmen he had drawn on his desk at the Ninja Academy and in the margins of old notebooks. In large groups, they clung to the tries, protruding their heads from holes carved in the trunks and swinging from the brooches. They appeared harmless enough until Naruto came up to one of them and held out his hand. The blonde was thrilled when a courageous little stickman cautiously climbed inside to the tent that, as he gasped in horror, he crushed the small creature into tiny pieces of wood and bark instead of gently folding his fingers around it. A stunned silence fell. Naruto gazed, Sasuke gazed, the stickmen gazed. Sasuke then took off running, and as soon as he was out of the clearing, The little creature's collective cries of indignation for their fallen comrade filled the space. Naruto was encased in a thick layer of the agonized stick monsters as they all lunged. Yuwa. Sasuke. They're killing me. Long out of earshot, however, the Uchiha had already made its getaway. Thus, Naruto launched his second assault in the Forbidden Forest. It feels like someone's missing, Kiba said casually as he tossed a stick into the Forbidden Forest's edge for Akamaru to retrieve. Yeah, Sakura said, attempting to approach Sasuke as closely as she could without him, or Ino, noticing, it really does. From the shade of a tree he was sharing with Neji and Shikamaru, Naruto answered, Hey, Sasuke. As the three of them engaged in the eternally stressful activity of cloud watching, the ninja chose to eat their lunch outside, where the temperature was pleasant and similar to that of Konohagakure. What, Dobi? Where the hell is Kakashi? The receptionist looked at the obviously strange white-haired man sitting in one of the waiting room chairs with disapproval. His nose had been buried in the book since he entered about 30 minutes ago, and he giggled suggestively into it, as he would every few minutes. She felt her left eyelid twitch, and the different pieces of cloth covering 3/4 of his face did nothing to conceal the blatant laughter he displayed. Then it was his turn, and somehow she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Mr. Kakashi, was it? The man in question, wearing an odd uniform despite the strong advice to wear formal robes, was likely smiling because he curved his one visible eye into an upside down U, or had fallen asleep on its own. Actually, my family name is Hitaki. Well then, Mr. Hitaki. The white-haired man interrupted the woman before she could say anything more, insisting, actually, I would prefer to be addressed as Kakashi, thank you. Well, Mr. Kakashi. Kakashi. It took all of the woman at the front desk's strength not to heave his persistent ass out the door after the hasty correction, which was the final straw. Her, and the author's, mounting annoyance was not eased by the fact that insistive wasn't a real word, based on the red, squiggly line it stood upon. Kakashi grinned. Well then, sir, the minister would like to see you now. Thank you, ma'am. Stowing the enigmatic little orange book into one of the numerous pockets that encased his body, the white-haired man proceeded to the door on her right in an attempt to rela. She let out a sigh as he vanished, curiosity taking over. She took a quick look at the paper he had just shown her. Hitaki Kakashi, she whispered to herself, the village's temporary representative concealed in the leaves. With a sigh, she put the papers back in their stacks and stopped reading. As if working here didn't bring her enough weirdos. It had always seemed to Kabuto that Orochimaru-sama was more feminine than he appeared. Even the smallest decisions, such as what to wear in the morning, which color of eyeshadow best complemented his skin tone, even though he chose the same one every morning, what to eat for breakfast, which body to switch into after Sasuke-kun's retrieval failed, etc., took him a very long time, and he took even longer to prepare for an impending mission. It's hard to imagine that an S-class missing nin who nearly destroyed the legendary Konohagakure by himself wouldn't have been upset about losing his favorite traveling sandals a few days prior. However, he did at the last minute. Orochimaru-sama had made the decision to accompany the Sound 4 via the outer dimensional overlap that led to the odd nation known as China. They ultimately followed through and departed the underground mansion just before sunset, despite the fact that this had completely disrupted the mission schedule. The map showed that they had reached China just after dawn. In the Qingdao port with little time for rest, they moved quickly, covering vast distances on foot and by car. They traveled a lengthy route from Qingdao that swiftly passed through the cities of Shijiazhuang, Ion, Urumqi, and Bishkek. Following a brief respite, they proceeded from Bishkek to Uzbekistan, then crossed Iran before finally resting in Turkey. The effectiveness of their telephone poles, the traits of their wildlife, the purposes of the car, and the roads they traveled on, and the different cultures they encountered were all things Kabuto was sure to record in his many notes about this strange new world. He hypothesized that there were not many differences or similarities between this world and their dimension because he noticed that many things were similar. Among the many things the medic nin had observed in this dimension, the first was that the farther they traveled northwest, the more alien and strange the culture became, with Turkey serving as the most notable example. He was unable to understand this place and had been scrawling frantically in his notebook as soon as he crossed the border. By now, Tayuya, Sakin, and Yukon were tasked with scouting for anything noteworthy or intriguing, while Hirobu was sent out to stock up on blankets, water bottles, food that would last them at least a month, and other necessities. As a result, Orochimaru-sama, Kidomaru, Kabuto, and Kimimaru, who had insisted on his involvement in the mission but had only been able to do so by walking a short distance and being carried by Hirobu in the most dignified manner, were left to explore the town and absorb as much information as they could in the limited time they had available. They sensed it, a kind of chakra signature hiding some sort of tavern, in Turkey, the most bizarre country they had ever visited. It was very strong, but Kabuto found that if you poured a lot of chakra into the jutsu, you could mess with its internal mechanism, which would disable the illusion and barrier and make it easy to get through, and so, driven by curiosity and a secret purpose, the four of them did just that. This mission would be amazed for them. Although Harry never really got to watch the kung fu fighting movies that Dudley occasionally brought home, recollections of hiding in Dudley's closet to catch a glimpse of Jackie Chan tormented him as he thought about this. He did remember one thing. It was definitely not the intention of ninjas to enjoy scones as much as Sasuke did, despite his best efforts to conceal it. Ninjas were also not supposed to be so noisy. Naruto, Kiba, Lee. Annoying. Naruto, Kiba, Lee, Sasuke. Or incooperative with their employers. Naruto, Kiba, Sasuke, Neji. However, some of them were quite frightening, as one might expect from ninja, Shino, Neji, Sasuke. And if he knew one thing about them all, it was that they were all capable of destruction. Only a few hours had passed since it occurred, within 30 seconds of Harry averting his gaze from Naruto. The blonde had vanished. Harry heard a loud, earth-shaking explosion go off in the distance almost instantly. Shortly after, Naruto had reappeared, beaming as though he had committed an unforgivably heinous act and was extremely proud of it. Harry felt compelled to be even more cautious than he usually was, which was pretty damn cautious. However, it had been nearly 7 minutes since the boy who lived last saw any of the ninja during lunch. Given that there were roughly 13 of them wandering the school, that was a difficult accomplishment. Harry was feeling a little anxious by this point and felt compelled to assess a brief review that essentially summed up all he had learned about his bodyguards. Out of sight. Apocalypse plus ninja there. With this final thought, he made the decision to leave the lunch table he was sharing with a few other Gryffindors and a Ravenclaw in order to search for them and make sure they didn't get into any trouble and they were out of sight. For an entire 8 minutes he questioned whether the castle could handle it. With only his wand and a half-eaten leg of chicken, Harry set out through the doors of the Great Hall, hoping for the best but anticipating the worst. He looked around the front of the school for a few minutes, mostly searching for burning corpses and signs of destruction, but he found nothing. However, a short while later, he heard the characteristic sound of a dog barking. Harry pursued the sound to a clearing just beyond Hagrid's hut. Close to the Forbidden Forest's tree line, he discovered the shinobi there, sprawled out in the tree branches and shade, eating chips, tossing sticks into the forest, and soaking up the warm sun. Nay, doesn't that one look like a cat? No, it looks like a cloud. You know, Neji, for someone with Byakugan, you really suck at cloud watching. Harry dropped his chicken bone in relief at the quiet revelation. There appeared to be no widespread destruction, chaos, or casualties, nothing. When Naruto finally caught sight of the untidy-haired wizard, he exclaimed, "Harry, I was afraid that during the 3 minutes, actually, it was 11 minutes, that we were gone, you had been abducted by that one guy we don't know anything about." "You mean Voldemort? Bless you, Shikamaru?" "Naruto, that's his name. Well, it sounds like a sneeze." As he looked around at the shinobi's positions, Harry did his best to ignore Naruto's digressions. The hyperactive blonde, Neji, and Shikamaru sought refuge in the shade of the tree, while Lee and Shino Rella. Ed in its branches, Sasuke, Sakura, and Ino were leaning against a boulder a short distance away from them. The girls were beaming, while the boy with the raven hair was uneasy and a little queasy. Tenten, Hinata, and Shoji were sitting in the grass a short distance away, polishing knives, long, thin needles, and other weapons that looked dangerous while eating chips a little too far into the tree line for Harry's comfort. Kiba was playing fetch with Akamaru farther away. They were tossing a long, thin, familiar-looking stick back and forth into the foreboding, unquestionably lethal forest. "Do you really think that forest is that deadly?" "Doubt it." Harry was irritated and prickly, but when a bark and a cry of annoyance came from the forest, this was forgotten. With Akamaru following closely behind and a low growl in his throat, Kiba burst into the clearing a few seconds later. An irate bark was heard in response to the statement, "Shut up, Akamaru. It is your fault. Don't use that tone with me." The boy who lived could only watch in disbelief as the, ostensibly, one-sided dispute played out in front of him. Attending a wizarding school and all, he had witnessed many strange things in the past, but this had to be among the most bizarre. Had he ever witnessed someone engage in a verbal altercation with a dog? He quickly retracted that he had witnessed Mrs. Weasley and Sirius argue many times before. Hinata whispered, "What happened, Kiba?" And it was clear from her tone that the boy didn't do this very often. "It's Akamaru's fault. He snapped back. He says I threw it too far, but I think he just can't catch now we can't find my wand. At that moment, Harry most likely would have accepted responsibility if he could. 2 demon spawn questions had emerged as a result of these recent events. First question about demon spawn. Why in the world was Kiba playing fetch with his wand of all things? Second demon spawn question. Why the Forbidden Forest of all places to lose it? Forbidden, goddamn it, Naruto said. Well, where is it then? Kiba pointed behind him and he claimed, it's in the forest, obviously. As though it were the most obvious thing in the world. However, it was. After that, a plethora of obno-ious conversations resumed, though they were to be left out for the author's sake, as she felt it was appropriate to channel her inner Shikamaru and found it too difficult to type specifics, in which they discussed what would happen to Kiba's wand if they failed to retrieve it, what would happen to Kiba's involvement in the mission if they failed to retrieve it, and what would happen to the shinobi themselves if they did retrieve it. The author also felt it was appropriate to let readers know that Neji was largely responsible for the discussion of fate. So we have definitely decided going into the forest as our fate. Neji, say, fate, one more time and I swear all. He sarcastically mocked, what? Kick my ass, before Tenten and Naruto shot him a knowing glance. Harry believed that Neji's silence was also his destiny. Uncertain of how he got drawn into the entire mess that had resulted from a game of fetch, Harry found himself and 12 shinobi of various moods and hair colors standing in front of the Forbidden Forest, prepared to march headfirst into the menacing foliage. Since Harry had visited the forest more times than he could count, roughly 7, but who was really counting? Not the author. They had decided that he would be the one leading the expedition since Sasuke was the only person who had been in the forest besides Kiba. He was supposed to be the second in case Harry died too soon, followed by Naruto. The massive group of ninja and a wizard then charged, ran, sauntered, swaggered, bounded, multiplied, and slowly walked into the forest while shouting, "Youth! Dat Bayo!" and "Shut the fuck up!" When he found himself with only Sasuke, Sakura, and a few of Naruto's replications after a few minutes, Harry quickly changed his mind about the terrible idea of making so much noise while leaving such a large trail for something to follow. As Harry watched the shinobi perform incredible feats of strength and agility, leaping and weaving through the trees at deafening heights and speeds as if it were as easy and second nature as breathing, the others had either fallen behind them, fled ahead, or moved in a different direction. The boy who lived had also found it odd that they were going so far into the forest, considering that the wand should have fallen closer to the tree line rather than farther away. At last he said, "Hey, isn't this too far?" Well, yeah, Kiba and his team are practically experts at tracking and finding stuff, especially with Hinata's Byakugan, so they stayed behind. Why? No, they probably found it by now. Then why are we still in the Forbidden Forest? Forbidden, goddammit, the fact that the entire, looking for Kiba's wand, mission was really just a pre-T for the shinobi to explore the forest was so clear to Naruto it was simply calling to them because it was so ominous, so deliciously dangerous as the Soul Junin, Kakashi, the mission's general overseer, had cautioned them against it. He had sternly warned them not to go in unless they had a valid EQs. And where could they have found Kiba's misplaced wand? Unfortunately, Harry was drawn into it. After a while, Harry addressed one of the replications and asked, "Naruto, you said that you and Sasuke explored here yesterday?" "Well, yeah, but we didn't see much, just Sackman, some killer tree sprites, some killer trees, a few unicorns, a lake." Harry twitched, and Naruto muttered, "Just muttered." Sakura continued to insist on using honorifics, even though it's likely that nobody in this dimension understood what they meant, and asked, "What else is in this forest, Harry-san?" Astonished by the question, Harry stammered, Well, I'm not too sure what Sackman is, but yeah, unicorns, tree sprites, enchanted lakes, centaurs, dementors, werewolves, vampires, ghosts, demons, some living dead, some dark wizards, and oh, giant spiders." Sakura shuddered. Naruto was aware of her aversion to spiders. Who didn't? He went on, "And once, even Voldemort was hiding here." "Oh yeah, about him, Harry-san, can you tell?" A flash of green, however, flashed into view before Sakura could finish her question. It kicked off a tree and landed with such force that it blew a crater into the forest floor, creating a mushroom cloud of dirt and upsetting the wildlife. After protecting their eyes, Naruto, who was shocked that he had scattered all of these bunchins, Sakura, Sasuke, and Harry finally laid them on Lee, who was standing in the middle of the devastation, covered in dirt but grinning triumphantly. As soon as the rubble had subsided, he exclaimed, "Yash, Neji, I have won." He cried out in triumph, but the Hyuga was nowhere to be found. Neji isn't even here, exclaimed Naruto. What the hell, Lee? Oh, I guess he didn't hear me when I declared our race. Though he wasn't sure why Lee had chosen this location for the finish line, Naruto was certain that the Hyuga heard the boisterous, round-eyed boy and chose to ignore him with no real destination in sight. He was probably just running blindingly through the forest at speeds that were comparable to the sound barrier. He blushed and made a courteous bow, mainly toward Sakura, saying, "Well then, I lost my team. May I ask your permission on accompanying yours?" Sakura grinned, "Sure, Lee-san," and Harry winced. Lee grinned back and followed Naruto and the pink-haired Kunoichi, with Sasuke trailing the lone wizard a short distance ahead. "You know, lunch is about over, we should head back." Harry shivered visibly, but was interrupted before he could finish. "What is the matter, Harry-san?" As purple-eyed as ever, Naruto stiffened upon sensing it. His breath crystallized in the cold air as he pressed his surprise, as if a piece of ice had fallen down the back of his shirt and was slowly riding down his spine. He shivered as he observed Lee, Sakura, and Sasuke doing the same. "Get behind me, everyone!" Harry screamed angrily, drawing his wand and assuming what might have been the wizard equivalent of a fighting stance. With greater urgency, Lee repeated, "What is the matter, Harry-san?" Before assuming a true fighting stance and serving as his backup, Naruto and Sasuke positioned themselves naiti to the armed boy, while Sakura stood naiti to him. He yelled, "Go back!" as the temperature dropped into danger. "Why are you just standing there? I said go." Naruto yelled, "No," as loudly. "This is what we're here for, you go back." Harry remained silent and turned his gaze forward, concentrating on the slowly moving shadows. With all the foliage either freezing or dying behind them, another shudder had to be repressed by Naruto. Sasuke made a sound naiti to him, and Naruto turned to face him in concern. The Uchiha was clutching his head in pain as more shadows circled them menacingly. Breathlessly, he called, "Naruto, take Sakura and go," causing the other boy's stomach to knot painfully. The blonde shinobi watched in horror as his companion with the raven hair fell to his knees, muttering incoherently and clutching his head even more tightly. Naruto believed he heard him whisper, "Itachi, no, don't." But he wasn't positive. Naruto turned, prepared to sling Sasuke over his shoulder and make his getaway back to the school, dragging the others with him, whether he wanted to or not. But he stopped. It felt like the piece of ice that froze his spine had reached all the way to the center of his mind as all thoughts of escape and hope left his mind and were replaced by desperation and loss. He collapsed to his knees. For some reason, he could only recall the chilly, solitary evenings in his apartment, the sensation of being invisible while strolling through Konoha's streets, and the group impressions of fear, disgust, and hatred he had seen as a child. He recalled lying in bed every night, wondering why him? Why me? Why me? Why me? Why me? Why? What did I do? He could hardly hear Sakura's helpless cries. "Naruto! Naruto! Get over it! Sasuke-kun! Sasuke-kun! Help Naruto!" In spite of his desire to assist and to get away, Naruto felt as though he was drowning in his own misery and memories of his past. All sentiments of joy were ripped away, and he fought for any warmth. A scream of "Epecto Patramon," a fading blue light, and the feeling of landing on soft, familiar sand were the last things Naruto remembered before collapsing to the ground and letting himself slip into the terrible, cold blackness. And a trembling, warm hand clutching frantically at his shoulder. "Omake, Ollivander, come on in, Sand siblings." The decision had been made. Ninjas were idiots. People who weren't fit to handle wands, much less own them, or even enter his store, were cold, heartless, and terrifying. However, regrettably, they had arrived, destroyed, and then departed. The final three must have been the worst by far, entering with the swagger of seasoned killers and brandishing a variety of enormous, lethal weapons that had included gourds, fans, and mummies, among other things. And as soon as they arrived, the three ninja, two grinning, one frowning indifferently, were gone. They had taken three perfectly good wands and left behind a desolate desert, quite literally a desert, of hopelessness and the reputation of having the worst customers in all of wand shop's history. Additionally, this specific wand shop had eisted for a very long time. Ollivander questioned whether sandstorms were covered by his insurance. When Harry awoke, he was blinking blearily at the ceiling. What was he doing there, and where the devil was he? Naruto and the other ninja were nowhere to be found. Where are the Dementors now? Was Dumbledore aware that Harry and his bodyguards conducted a covert, albeit grudging, forest tour? Was his expulsion imminent? Has anyone passed away? His glasses were missing. He only had one pillow. Why? That question was resolved now that Harry was familiar with the infirmary's appearance and scent. Additionally, He was there because he was unable to simultaneously repel the Dementors from both himself and the pointless ninja. The dark creatures shivered and fell in a heap. After one glance, Sakura mostly remained conscious with Harry, doing her best to use daggers to fend off the evil beings, and she was largely successful. Sasuke went down first, followed by Naruto and Lee. Harry used a powerful Patronus to scatter a remarkable number of Dementors that had gathered around Naruto and Sasuke just as they were about to go out like lights, hitting the ground and landing softly in a pile of sand that had never been there before. However, it was too late for him to take action against Lee. At least 4 towering, skeletal figures circled him, slowly consuming his soul like a delectable cocktail. But everything else was a blur. The Dementors surrounding Lee vanished in a haze of sand before Harry could make sense of the collective sound of what might have been grain hitting the ground. The best way to describe it is that an earth-based octopus tentacle struck 2 of them. Another died with an unearthly screech, crushed viciously, and cocooned after receiving a barrage of daggers. The last gave Sakura a curtsy and withdrew into the forest's shadows. In that instant, a tiny, red-headed figure appeared in front of the confused wizard and the only ninja who was awake, with pink hair. If the black, hooded heads of several Dementors hadn't suddenly charged at him in a chorus of shriek shrills, Harry would have had a chance to get a good look at him. He had fainted at that point. No, fainted. The word, fainted, sounded far from heroic. Reaching for his glasses and adjusting his pillow, Harry yawned and rubbed his eyes when his now focused eyes found the familiar, delectable chocolate. He grabbed it in a dazed search for a flash of gold. He had already taken a few bites out of it when he heard Hermione and Ron arguing and the distinct sound of a door opening and closing. Warble is not spelled with 3 B's, Ron. Fred and George said it was. Harry let out a sigh. A voice shouted from the sick bed to his left, "Oi! Shut the hell up, people are trying to recover in here." In order to get a clear picture of Naruto eating chocolate while lying prone in bed, Harry stiffened and reached over to pull the thin, white tapestry aside. "Hey, Harry," he said with a smile. "Naruto, what are you doing in bed?" "I don't know, I was gonna jump out the window when I woke up, but I found all this great chocolate and I didn't want to get up anymore cause I want to eat the chocolate. I like chocolate. Do you like chocolate, Harry? I wonder if Sasuke likes chocolate. Do you like chocolate, Sasuke?" The blonde was rambling then. A moment later, Harry, certain that at least half of those words weren't even in English, heard a drowsy Sasuke complain, "Shut up, Dobby." The ninja's bed was only a few feet away from his chocolate-eating friend. When Ron eventually reached the bed in which Harry lay, he exclaimed, "Ah, Harry. Tell Hermione how to spell warble." The witch with the bushy hair interrupted, "Never mind that, Harry, what on earth happened? First you go off outside during lunch, and the natty thing we know, some strange boy drags you back to the Great Hall in the most peculiar way." "What do you mean, drag?" "Well, actually, you were floating on a cloud of sand." He didn't speak any English, but he had a wand and asked for Professor Dumbledore. "Where is he now?" "Talking with the headmaster." "Do you know who he is, Harry?" "He really was a strange boy, wore makeup, had a tattoo, carried a gourd on his back." Naruto exclaimed, "Oh yeah, that's Gaara." While chomping on some chocolate at the last line, Sasuke snorted in the background, saying, "And it's not makeup, he's just like that, but don't get the wrong idea, he's really a good guy." "I heard that, Sasuke. He tried to kill you, idiot, twice. So, he's different now. You can't judge someone just cause they tried to kill you twice?" Harry shifted to be honest. How many people had this conversation while maintaining their clinical sanity? Not too many. "So you know this boy, Naruto?" "Duh, I said he's Gaara. He's a Sunanin, our allies. He was psychotic before but now he's fine. I'm sure he won't try to kill anyone anymore, and really, he's a great guy. You'll love him." The 3 wizards had some doubts about that. Jade green eyes scanned the eccentric room, taking in whatever oddities it had to offer. They briefly rested on the majestic red bird perched in a corner and looked over the strange, tinkering silver instruments that were arranged on some shelves, and that was a lot, considering that the room was just odd, even by shinobi standards. Only minutes earlier, a eccentric man wearing a ridiculously tall and pointed hat, the kind that could have never been useful for anything other than looking ridiculous, had ushered Gaara into the room with grace even by the standards of shinobi. The tiny sand nin, seated in a chair that was so soft and cozy that it almost felt uncomfortable, did not bat an eyelash when he heard hurried footsteps hurrying in his direction. Instead, to keep the sand out of his gourd, he gently loosened the cork. He couldn't afford to be too cautious after the little incident with a certain blonde leaf nin. Harry was certain it was too late to go to the final 2 classes of the day, but he had no idea how long he had been in the hospital since the sun had already set. The castle was covered in eerie shadows. a clear indication that not all students would be amenable to any kind of education, Hermione included. With a slight migraine, the boy who lived strolled out the doors of the infirmary, accompanied by one bouncing and one ill-tempered ninja. Headaches and exhaustion are the physical consequences of a Dementor attack. Only a still, pathetically, unconscious Draco Malfoy remained in the solitary infirmary with Lee, the shinobi who wore green spad beneath his robes and insisted on posing the gaudy garb whenever he felt necessary, something Harry never approved of. The typically cheerful and active boy lay in bed, quiet and pale. To be honest, Harry liked him better than a boisterous, yelling child. As the three made their way through the hallways, Naruto mused, "Poor Lee," while munching on some chocolate, and he just got out of the hospital, too. The bespectacled boy was intrigued by Harry after reading the last line, and he naturally asked, "What happened?" "He survived surgery a little while ago and just got back to light training. He was so happy." "What put him in the hospital?" "More like, who?" jokingly said the once, and still, sulky Sasuke. "Gaara," admitted Naruto. The blonde appeared to have been a little confused by the chocolate because he responded in a way that, if sober, he would have covered up with a defense. Curiosity was sparked and grew, demanding more than a single word response. Harry asked, "So, what happened?" Naruto sneered, "It was a fight, Harry, duh," showing that the blonde had crushed the wrapper of his chocolate bar in a tanned fist. Gaara went straight up psycho and tried to squeeze the youth out of Lee twice. At worst, Lee was irritating, but not to the point where Harry felt he should be killed. Harry gaped, "Bloody hell, what did Lee do?" "Well, nothing, you see, we hold an EM every months in our village. A few paintings who were watching the attack chastised the dark-haired ninja with exclamations of, "Oh, I never." The blonde's explanation was interrupted when a pale hand appeared out of nowhere and cuffed him in the head with an audible smack. "What was that for, Teme? Don't go spouting unnecessary things, Dobby," the other boy reprimanded, his hand still up after the assault. Harry felt himself sink into a curiosity that now burned with such intensity that it threatened to consume him as Naruto harumphed and crossed his arms in irritated silence. However, Sasuke's gaze silenced any queries that were still in the back of his throat. Until Sasuke changed direction and muttered something about going to his own house, there was no more talking and only a slow silence in the hallways. They trudged through. Naruto followed Harry up some magical stairs after yelling a cheerful goodbye at the other boys retreating back. Despite being exhausted, the wizard boy was unable to fall asleep after mumbling the password to the portrait entrance. He simply crawled into bed and murmured, "Good night." To a barely conscious Ron he required knowledge. Really, who was that red-headed boy? Why didn't Sasuke want Naruto to discuss it? Harry had to know. He glanced at his nightstand's enchanted clock and saw that it was 10:30. Harry made a self-promise to use his invisibility cloak at 11 o'clock. Ouch! God damn it! With a snort at the curse, Naruto awoke and rubbed his eyes. Whoever had just woken him up would receive the telling off of his life because he had a pounding headache since the Dementor attack. The boy had been tormented by memories of his early years, and it had taken him ages to finally get his mind clear enough to sleep. He could easily push the unwanted thoughts to the back of his mind on any other day by thinking of something lighter and happier, like his team or ramen, but tonight he simply couldn't bring himself to do that. Instead, the blonde genin snorted and looked through the slit of his tapestries, where he saw an enraged Harry hopping up and down on one foot. As if in pain, something must have slipped his mind in the darkness. Naruto was slightly better than the average genin at seeing in the dark, and he never really had any problems with it. He questioned whether this was due to the Kyuubi, as it was the source of so many other abilities. Naruto observed as Harry collected himself and started searching his trunk. Naruto wondered if he was searching for more chocolate. However, Harry took out an odd sheet instead of chocolate. In the dense darkness of the dorm room, it glistened, reflecting light that didn't east. Naruto was about to ask the other boy what it was to let him know he was there, but he changed his mind. Initially, Harry's head vanished, followed by his torso, legs, and feet. Harry had left. No, it's invisible but not gone. The breathing and the heavy, in comparison to a ninja's, footsteps were still audible to the weary blonde at that moment. A wave of curiosity and mischievousness overcame the rowdy boy. When Naruto heard Harry loudly leaving the dorm, he removed his, very fashionable, sleeping cap and, like a good ninja, grabbed the kunai pouch he kept under his pillow. Considering whether or not it would be wise to wake Kiba, he concluded that it wasn't, and he slipped out of bed as stealthily as his lack of experience would permit. As silent as stumbling shadows, they darted through the halls and corridors, past the portraits that slept, and down the magical stairs. Before Harry finally stopped in front of two enormous stone gargoyles, Naruto pondered for a moment where they were heading. The gargoyles gave the wizard boy a suspicious look and then demanded a password, which surprised Naruto. The wizard scratched his head, wondering, lemon drops? Toenail tasties? Acid pops? Pimple puffs? Caramel chicken? God damn it, Snickers? Even though Naruto didn't know what Harry was doing, he chose to make his presence known by approaching the other boy covertly and shouting, "Dango!" in his left ear, which made him jump and made Naruto smile with laughter. At Naruto's outburst, the stone gargoyles leapt aside, opposing a door. "Naruto! What in bloody hell do you think you're doing here?" "No, Harry, what in bloody hell do you think you're doing here? And what in bloody hell are the both of you doing here?" Harry had previously seen him, but it had been in a fog of despair and unpleasant memories. Harry couldn't help but notice how incredibly, genuinely, strange his enigmatic, red-headed savior was now that he had seen him face to face, and with a clear head people noticed his thickly dark aura, giant gourd, tattoo that marred his forehead, and heavy eyeliner. With his arms folded and his face twisted into a frown, he uttered, "And what in bloody hell are the both of you doing here?" "Gaara!" Naruto exclaimed with joy. "What are you doing roaming the halls so late?" Harry's mind was in sync with the blonde's for once at this hour. Why was the red-headed ninja in the hallways? "Patrolling," said the other. "Do I even want to know what you're doing, Naruto?" "Not really, 'cause I don't know either." After glancing at Harry with indifference, the enigmatic ninja Gaara moved the enormous gourd on his back a bit and crossed his arms more firmly before glaring at the wizard. Harry was reminded of his prolonged invisibility when he saw that the other boy's meaning eyes did not stray or leave his person, so he hurried to reveal his as yet undiscovered lower body. Naruto said, "Harry, this is Gaara, of the desert," adding, "In retrospect, he's from a neighboring hidden village allied with ours. Remember? You've met, right? For the final few words?" Harry stumbled, too preoccupied with hiding his invisibility cloak to try to mutter something remotely clever. He said, not exactly. Turning his back to leave, Gaara appeared disinterested in the conversation. He turned a corner slowly and blended into the shadows of the dim hallways, leaving Harry and Naruto with the cold order, "Take him back, Naruto." Having successfully, albeit reluctantly, quenched his curiosity, Harry turned away and headed for his dorm, leaving a bewildered Naruto blinking after the two fleeing figures. It was unbelievable to him that he had risked repulsion by removing his invisibility cloak in the middle of the night in order to meet that red-headed, haughty sod Gaara. Harry vowed that all ninjas were intolerable and the same. When the blonde boy nervously spoke up, Harry realized Naruto was following him as he nearly ran through the hallways, unconcealed and irate. Uncomfortably, he began, "Anyo, Harry." The other boy yelled, "What?" "I wanted to know when it happened, but didn't know how to ask." "What is it?" What were those things in the forest? You know, earlier." Harry halted suddenly, feeling a little uncomfortable and guilty. The fact that the ninja had little knowledge of the wizarding world had slipped his mind, and he doubted that anyone had bothered to explain what had transpired in the Forbidden Forest that afternoon. Not knowing where to start, the wizard stumbled, Remember when I said there were dark creatures in the Forbidden Forest?" The other boy gave a head nod. "Well, these dark creatures were called Dementors, and they feed on good memories." Naruto nodded once more, somberly taking in the small but crucial piece of information. Harry looked at him briefly before they walked silently on to the dorm. Sasuke looked over his partially consumed buttered scone to catch a glimpse of the usually silent Neji. The heir to the Hyuga branch was using a pair of polished bamboo chopsticks to eat rice, miso soup, and pickled vegetables. The older boy was frowning scornfully at Western breakfast fare only yesterday. In silence, the raven-haired Avenger came to the conclusion that Neji was just another ninja to join the growing number of ninja who had found the kitchens and that house elves were frightened of fire-based ninjutsu. The Uchiha then announced in silence that they would soon pay a brief visit to the kitchens, perhaps to insist on tomato scones, perhaps to hone his fire-breathing skills. Whichever one, Harry focused all of his immediate attention on Sasuke and Neji because he sensed a menacing cloud hovering somewhere near the Slytherin table. Sasuke appeared to be straying from plans of pure, destructive evilness while munching on a scone, while Neji was happily enjoying his breakfast. Harry chose to ignore them in favor of concentrating on Neville, who was seated native to him and eating some bacon. "How are you, Neville?" Harry asked. "You seem a little, dusty." After blushing in embarrassment, the chubby boy grudgingly confessed that he had dropped his broom into the sandpits while preparing for the Quidditch tryouts. He also pointed out to Harry that the sandpits, which were supposed to provide a secure and cozy cushion for players who were unlucky enough to fall, weren't actually that comfy when you hit the ground with a mouthful of sand. All they did was make an indecent noise. However, their discussion came to an end, and they turned to face the teacher's tables with his arms outstretched as though attempting to embrace the magical ceiling. Dumbledore had risen to deliver the morning's announcement. Now that we are all situated, eating, and very much awake, I would like to introduce our new students. New students had been chimed like church bells by Dumbledore. All Harry could hear was the thunderclap of hell and the evil laughter of Satan's henchmen. His jaw drooped slightly, a sausage meat crumb slipping out from between his teeth. It was unbelievable to him. More ninjas, perhaps? How much damage did he believe the school could withstand? As Naruto did last night, the headmaster added the final sentence as an afterthought. They are to be sorted into their respective houses after dinner this evening. Please welcome Tamari, Konkuro, and Gaara, of the desert. Harry's memories from last night were rife with dark, unsettling visions of Gaara, the short, red-headed boy with the gourd strapped to his back. Moments later, the drab, gossip-filled roar of the students subsided as the Great Hall's enormous oak doors creaked open as the other shinobi in the room appeared to tense up in fear. Naruto looked up expectantly from his Cocoa Crisps. Neville yelled as three silhouetted figures emerged in the doorway, each with a hideous object fastened to their backs. Harry turned to see the different layers of sand covering the other boy's person start to slither off his hair and clothes in tiny beige grain lines, following the thin, controlled rivers that led to the Great Hall doors. Harry could not speak. However, Harry and Neville were the only witnesses, and the phenomenon ended almost as quickly as it had begun. Although the new shinobi wore school robes, their uniformity ended there. The little line was led by a blonde girl who walked with the demeanor of a veteran sergeant. The renowned Gaara, the girl, and another boy who strode behind her with a nonchalant swagger all had peculiarities that shouted nonconformity. Their journey had come to an end. Each stood at the teachers' tables in front of Dumbledore. The lone girl in the trio raised her arm and demanded silence as the hall erupted in whispers. Once more she placed a long, flat, black, polished object on her hip. After slipping it from her back, she had a smirk on her face and her sandy blonde hair pulled back into 4 ponytails. There was the other boy after that. When he entered, his face was shadowed by the hood of his robes, which, for some reason, had been pulled over his head now, though Harry could see it. He stood out slightly more than the other two because of the eye-catching, dark purple face markings that brushed over his rebellious features. He looked like a face-painted cat because of the peculiar way his hood was sewn, which pinched 2 corners at an odd angle. He had a big item on his back as well. From Harry's vantage point, it had looked like a mummy, with unkempt hair peeking through the bandages that had been wrapped to the scalp. Similar to how Gaara and the other girl carried their bulky items, it appeared heavy and was strapped to his back. Harry would say that this was the most ridiculous of the 3 if he had to choose. And there was Gaara, of course. For a boy who appeared to be very inarticulate, he was wearing all the feelings Harry had ever witnessed him press in one place: boredom, disdain, and irritation. As Dumbledore concluded the introduction, something about accepting new students and being receptive to different cultures, he crossed his arms impassively. The hall clapped, mainly out of courtesy, and they went back to their breakfast. A voice seated a short distance away from him claimed, "Gaara," with excessive excitement. When Harry looked over, he saw Naruto frantically gesturing for the red-headed ninja to take a seat near to him at the table. He walked over a little hesitantly. "Harry," claimed a second, pleasantly recognizable voice. He was hurriedly approached by Ron and Hermione, who appeared to have half-run, half-sprinted to the Great Hall for breakfast. Breathlessly, Ron sat down between his best friend and the silently baffled Neville and said, "Sorry about that, Harry." "Hey, what's up with Neville?" Harry pretended to be Purple Ed and shook his head rather than playing the sand. His goal was to start his day as normally as possible. Or as normal as it gets, anyway. Despite his odd and frail appearance, Kabuto had concluded that the man in front of him was dangerous. The reason the man was hiding in Turkey was unknown to Kabuto, but it was said that he was a notorious villain. The strange creature claimed it was a business trip. He was enlisting members of a shadowy army. Even though Orochimaru and his group had easily breached their stronghold, the man, who went by the name of Voldemort, was surprisingly obedient. On the other hand, it was most likely the cause of his obedience. Nevertheless, Kabuto felt a tremendous power within himself, not the power of a Jinchuriki, but rather the kind of power that Itachi or Orochimaru-sama possessed. It was dangerous and foreboding and should not be ignored. As Voldemort-sama had stated, only those with extraordinary abilities could see the tavern because it was dark. As they followed their hosts deeper into the intricate interior of the magical building, it was hard to see inside. As he did so, Kabuto observed the foreigners in the shadows. There were few reports of interdimensional relationships, and their people had little knowledge of the alternate universe to which they had traveled. Rumor had it that the third and fourth Hokage of the Leaf had visited this specific dimension on occasion, but there was either no proof or very little. The sound of shifting stone above and below them caught Kabuto's attention as well. Although the stairway's descent into the dark tavern's belly appeared straightforward, the floors above and below them were shifting, forming a complete concrete and stone jigsaw puzzle that would be nearly impossible to navigate. Depicting a solid alliance and, thus, a new world to conquer, the bespectacled Sound Nin grinned, impressed. Naruto was relieved that Sasuke was behaving less glary and brooding and more like himself. He needed someone to accompany him on his quest to at least partially integrate Gaara into society, in part because it was wonderful to have a friend back. They couldn't let their clients be killed by a psychotic, unstable ninja unless, of course, they were paid first. In actuality, though, the ninja all required some practice blending. There should be no haphazard ninjutsu or genjutsu moves, along with a little taijutsu lightning. However, when Naruto delivered 5 aerial roundhouse kicks to Sasuke's head at lunchtime the day after the Dementor attack in the forest, he wasn't exactly considering this. Goddammit, though, that final Dobi wasn't going to get away with it. Thus, in the shinobi's preferred clearing in the Forbidden Forest for Operation Assimilation, Kakashi and Shikamaru, the highest-ranking ninja in the mission, assembled the Genin and Sand siblings, who lacked a clear ranking and, to be honest, no one was going to give them instructions for fear of dying young or at the very least getting a really nasty beating. Through his mask, Kakashi claimed, "All right, everybody, Shikamaru and I have a mission for all you criminals." From somewhere in the back, Kiba yelled, "How can we take you seriously when you were more than a half hour late?" "Is that right? But I have a good reason. You see, there was an old lady who lived in a shoe." The Inuzuka boy completely disregarded the ridiculous justification and whispered to his immediate companion, "I bet he was reading porn. And in the end, I saved the 52 children from Athlete's Foot. Any questions?" Liar. Anyway, Shikamaru and I have both noticed the amount of attention, destroyed school property, and potential casualties collectively gathered in our first week at Hogwarts, and we would like you all to know that the list is in fact quite intensive. Shikamaru? Behind a clipboard, the Chunin checked off the items he read aloud, saying, "Right, that's a tower, 5 tables, 9 chairs, 7 doors, C paintings, C windows, and 37 comments and complaints each. That's not so much, that was just yesterday, and if we keep going at this rate, God knows how much we'll get by the end of the year. But luckily for you guys, if the clients weren't able to fight things magically, and most importantly costlessly, then this all would have came out of your paychecks, whether you contributed to the destruction or not," said Kakashi. With his hand up somewhere in the front of the group, Naruto piped, "Okay, so what are we going to do about it?" He paused for dramatic effect before saying, "Didn't I say that I've developed a new mission for you guys? It's more like a mission within a mission, really, but it's just as important. I call it Operation Assimilation." A few moans echoed over the group floor. It sounded, well, a little cheesy. With a sharp, if slack, glance at Sasuke, Shikamaru said, "Really, it's great that you all have been trying so hard and taking this massive babysitting job so seriously, but honestly, let's make it less troublesome. No showing off, no overzealous chakra usage, more protecting the clients, less attacking them." Naruto added, all right, we'll be good, we get it now." To which Kakashi replied, "No, Naruto, I don't think you do. I can't stress enough the importance of keeping our cover. Let me remind you that the only people in this dimension who know our true identities are Harry, Hermione, Ronald and most of the staff. Let's try to keep it that way. During the first confrontation with the enemy we want to use the element of surprise to our advantage." Naruto felt the impulse to throw a kunai in that direction after hearing the word Dobi muttered somewhere to his left. I hope it struck Sasuke rather than Neji. Kakashi received a round of nods in response to the question. "Okay, everyone got it now? Alright, we'll start with trying to give off an air of inconspicuousness, no flashy taijutsu and ninjutsu. Also," said Shikamaru, "the only time someone is to be hurt on this campus is for self-defense, only to protect the client, only to protect yourself. Please remember that I don't care who started it, but keep in mind that Hokage-sama does care who you kill. In fact, let's keep killing at its minimum." Tenten raised her hand and said, "Kakashi-sensei, how hard are we to try during classes?" The final remark was met with a sigh and a slightly irritated blonde. "Learning this dimension's jutsu is important, but not first priority. You are not students, you are ninja acting as students to ensure the safety of the students who really are students and no Naruto. I'm not going to E-plane. Put your hand down and ask Sasuke." Alright, that concludes this mission's first meeting, even though it might be troublesome. Any more questions? Initially, it appeared that the sizable contingent of Nin were content with the information they had been given during the brief mission meeting for the second time. However, Tenten held up an unsure hand. Is Lee alright? When Kakashi's hand stopped turning the page of his orange book, the dull roar of conversation abruptly stopped. Naruto felt compelled to speak after observing the solemn crowd. He assured her, Tenten, Lee's okay. We saw him in the infirmary. Harry said all he needed was a little rest and some magic chocolate. He's fine. Really, however, Tenten didn't seem to be convinced. In fact, she seemed more concerned. Even after Sakura's attempt at consolation, she assured him that she would take the worried Kunoichi to see her fallen teammate as soon as possible. Once that was resolved, Sakura led Tenten and Neji to the infirmary as the shinobi eventually dispersed. Naruto didn't have the oddest feeling that he had forgotten something crucial until an hour later, when he was training with Sasuke. Harry carefully massaged his sore hand, attempting in vain to ease the pulsing tissue. Harry was forced to write lines for detention in Umbridge's classroom after classes that day, but he was using a special quill as if an unseen razor were simultaneously tracing the words onto his flesh. Whatever he wrote on parchment would sever the back of his hand and then instantly heal. Harry was compelled to write the words, "I must not tell lies," hundreds of times using his own blood because this particular quill didn't use ink. The fact that Naruto hadn't shown up for detention that morning annoyed him a good deal. However, he felt somewhat relieved that the other boy was spared such an unjust punishment. Additionally, he felt sorry for him because he would have to endure make-up detention tomorrow either in class or after classes. In any case, he was certain that Naruto's absence would not bring about anything positive. In relation to absence, Harry was also quite upset that he would have to miss Quidditch tryouts tomorrow. Harry wanted to be there to support Ron, who had admitted that he was going to try out for keeper. He let out a sigh. It's pointless to be depressed about something you can't control, he thought as they walked into the common room. Fortunately for Harry, Naruto came roaring down the dorm stairs as he was sitting in a cozy red chair in front of the fire. This spared the wizard boy from having to search for the ninja. Naruto exclaimed, "Harry, I was looking for you." Harry began, "Oh good, Naruto, we need to talk." "Yeah, I know, I forgot about my detention with Gama-san." Harry asked sharply, "About that, Naru, who is Gama-san?" The blonde boy admitted, "You know, Umbridge, she looks like my wallet, Gama-chan," and for effect, he took out his green wallet in the shape of a frog. The googly-eyed toad did look a lot like their defense against the dark arts teacher, which made Harry laugh. Harry said, "But hey, listen Naruto," as his spirits began to lift a bit even though the other boy was annoying. He couldn't help but pick up on his contagious attitude. "What are you going to do about skipping out on detention?" he asked. "What can I do?" replied Naruto. "I have to make it up. Of course I can't go back in time or anything, you know." Harry couldn't contain his laughter. In his third year, he discovered that lesson time travel was undoubtedly conceivable and utterly purple-ing. He claimed, "Anyway, Harry, what did you have to do? Sit-ups? Run laps?" He appeared to desire punishment. He was probably bored, so Harry didn't blame him. Harry rubbed the back of his neck and admitted, I had to write lines." Naruto's jaw fell agape. "That's it?" "Well, no, not really. Lines? But we did that in the academy," yelled Naruto. In an apparent attempt to ignore the other boy, Harry gave it some thought and concluded that he had a right to know. "Okay, I'll tell you, but you have to promise not to tell anyone else." "Was it something she wasn't supposed to do?" replied Naruto. "I know, she beat you, didn't she?" "No, I wasn't beaten," Harry replied. "Now, promise me you won't tell anyone, especially Hermione." Harry used the tortoise quill and writing in his own blood to explain his detention. As soon as he was certain Naruto understood the significance of the promise, he thought it was only right that he let the other boy know that he would also have to put up with it. Naruto, however, appeared somewhat purple-eyed rather than appalled. "Wow," said Naruto, his eyes lightly tracing the faint words as he meaned the swollen flesh on Harry's skin. "Don't tell Kakashi-sensei that it'd be hell." "He'd be mad." Harry asked. The blonde ninja shuddered and said, "No, he'd freaking jump with joy." Likely picturing the punishments his sensei might inflict with the notion, "I don't want to write, I will not fight with Sasuke, 3,000 times in the back of my hand." "Alright, deal, but you know that tomorrow, you have to do it too." "Yeah, I know, why weren't you there today?" Naruto responded, his voice much lower. "We all had to discuss that, you know, mission and stuff, like a meeting, in the forest. If I remembered about detention, I wouldn't have went." "It seems like a good idea to skip out right now," Harry said, mainly to himself. "Quidditch tryouts are tomorrow, and I wanted to see Ron try out for keeper." Quidditch, that one game where you fly around on brooms. Yeah, I'm supposed to try out too, you know, for Seeker. Naruto nodded his head in comprehension and mumbled, "Ah, but, Harry, why don't you just clone yourself? You can try out for Sheeper and go to detention." Harry began angrily, "Is that some kind of joke? Of course I can't," but he stopped when a truck-like idea struck him. Harry joyfully exclaimed, "I can't, but you can. You can teach me to clone myself, Naruto. You know how to do it, just show me the spell and I can try out for Seeker tomorrow." However, Naruto laughed at the other boy as though he had told a humorous joke, rather than enthusiastically agreeing. "It's not that easy, Harry," he uttered in between giggles, "but watch this." As Naruto pressed his hands together to form a hand seal, Harry stepped back, and two clones appeared nigh to him with a pop. "Now," Naruto replied, "I can use a henge to make one of them look like you." Harry marveled as one of the clones created a hand seal and transformed into a perfect replica of himself in a puff of smoke. "It looks so real. You can do whatever you want with it, just don't let anyone hit it too hard." With a pop and a puff of curly white smoke, Naruto dispelled the clones and vanished in a manner similar to how they had first appeared. "Thanks, Naruto," Harry said, giving the shorter boy a shoulder pat. "I owe you one." The other boy grinned and said, "You can repay me later, but let's get dinner, I'm starving." Harry felt so much better after he laughed for the first time. He and Naruto strolled to the Great Hall, absorbed in amicable conversation, the pain in his hand temporarily forgotten.